Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Wednesday. You guys know what that means. It's time for another midweek rundown. We have a loaded slate today, Brian. Up first, we're talking about the five best defenses that Notre Dame is going to face in 2026. Last week, we talked about the top offenses that they were going to face. Up on the docket today is defense, and it's going to be an interesting conversation. There's one obvious team at the top, some debate in the middle, and then there's some surprise teams to round out that group. We'll also be evaluating it based on D-line, linebackers, defensive backs, and also mention a couple teams that have the opportunity to sneak up in there. And in part two of today's show, we're continuing the opponent preview series. Up next is Notre Dame's fourth opponent of the regular season, the Purdue Boilermakers. And then in part three, Brian, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We are going to kind of throw our opinions into the hat about the Big Ten versus SEC debate. The narratives have changed on both sides of what makes each conference better than the other one. And so we're going to put our opinions in and see who we believe is a better conference. It's going to be a lot of fun.
And watching this debate is just hilarious. To watch the two sides change arguments, it's like listening to Republicans and Democrats argue when like 10 years ago, one side was saying this and the other hated it. Now they're completely opposite on these issues. It's absolutely flipping hilarious to watch this debate, man. And we're going to wade into it a little bit, and have a real discussion. It's not going to be like taking shots at the two conferences. I mean, we'll have some ironic responses to things, but really to dive into what does define a better conference. I think this is a great time to have that real conversation of what makes a conference better than the other, and then give our reasons. We'll kind of state the case for both sides, and then, we'll kind of give our opinion of it at the end. It's going to be a lot of fun, but, and then a mailbag at the end of the show today. Well, as Trev said in the chat, I did check this time, Trev, before I just jumped in and said, hey, everyone, and check, see if you did it. We'll have a mailbag today. Questions that are related to this will be given preference, but it'll be a fun conversation to have. There's no doubt about it. And I'm already seeing the chat. SEC has more depth. Big Ten's at the better top. But which of those defines which conference is better? That's what's kind of the fun about the argument. And so I'm looking forward to having that conversation. It's going to be fun. But we're going to kick things off, Trev, with some Notre Dame talk. And the Notre Dame talk is going to dive into, first and foremost, as we kind of evaluate the schedule and look at the opponents. We've already kind of done our schedule previews. And like you mentioned last week, we talked about the Notre Dame defense and the offenses they're going to face. And now it's time to talk about the Notre Dame offense and the kind of defenses they're going to face in 2026.
Yeah, it's an interesting comparison when you look at the defenses that Notre Dame face in 25 versus the defenses that they'll face this upcoming season. A little bit different of a conversation with the offenses. The offenses, there was clearly one up top, really two up top in Miami and SMU, and then BYU was kind of that middle ground team, and then you had other teams fighting for spots 4 and 5. Defensively, no.
I mean, there's a big drop off of what we know at the top compared to where else. I think this might be a little bit of a different conversation.
Yeah, without a doubt. Things are a little bit more even. Like, for example, the difference between Miami and BYU on offense is significantly greater than the gap between Miami and BYU on the defensive side. Some conversation that we'll get into as well. But, Brian, we're going to work back to front, and we're going to start with 5, work our way up to 1. And how we're going to be evaluating these is by position groups, whether it's good, bad, kind of talk about where they're at, not necessarily how they match up with Notre Dame per se. A lot of conversations there, but evaluating defensive lines, linebacking cores, and defensive backs, really their secondaries. It was an interesting ranking to dive into, man. It really was.
Yeah, I think when I look big picture at the Notre Dame slate on defense, and we'll kind of get into this in different ways. I think my overall takeaway is I think there's a little bit more known in the schedule from a defensive standpoint than what there is on offense. And I also think that part of that is, for the most part, I think teams that rebuild defenses have tended to be able to get maybe a little bit more investment on their return than teams that are overhauling an offense from a portal standpoint. For the most part, that's not entirely, going to be proven out all across the board. But, I look at like Miami last year, they had to overhaul their offense, and it took a big step down. the defense had to overhaul, and they got way better. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but I just feel like that's kind of been the MO. I mean, everybody kept talking the last 2 years about how good LSU's offense is going to be because of all the portal receivers they got, and it kind of disappointed both years. And I think their defense actually was better for stretch of the season last year. So I think there's just a lot of different aspects about what can work in the portal. Some positions work better than others. In college football as a whole, for example, we're going to have a very good idea this year if you can rebuild your offensive line and have success, because there's a lot of teams that are, I mean, Trev, not like a guy or two. We're looking at like Bama, especially like Texas A&M. There's a lot of teams that you're just like, dude, they're literally rebuilding at least 4 to 5 offensive line spots through the portal. It's wild. Well, can that work or not? I don't. I think I have my doubts, but we're going to know for sure because there's going to be enough, test cases this year to give us an idea. So when I look at the schedule, I think some of these teams that we look at on defense that Notre Dame's going to face that are very heavy in the portal overhauls, you feel like, okay, I think that's going to work for them. And so I think there's just a little bit maybe more depth on the schedule from a defensive standpoint than there is from an offensive standpoint.
I agree. Agreed completely. And a lot of it is with some of these defenses, especially, they have every 5 teams, all 5 teams that we're going to talk about, all have important guys coming back to kind of be the focal point of their defense in one way or another. Some have more than others, which is why they're higher on our rankings versus some other teams. But all 5 teams that we are going to talk about have a returning dude. And that is something that we couldn't necessarily say about the offensive side of the ball. A little bit more projection used with that side. But like I said, Brian, we're going to be working back to front here, and we're going to start with number 5 and then work our way to number 1. And up first is the North Carolina Tar Heels, an opponent that I believe this will be Marcus Freeman's second time going up against. They played them in 2022 when they had Drake May. Notre Dame emerged victorious. But this is This is a game where Drew Pine outdueled Drake May. I mean, it was a good day for Freeman
and company. He was so good that game, Trev. That was also one of those games where like Tommy Rees was like completely in his bag. I mean, he was so. You think of like they were running like floods where they were like running him off and bringing a running back underneath. They did like the bootleg throwback wheel route to Logan Diggs. I mean, he was so in his bag that day. And then obviously Notre Dame frustrated Drake May quite a bit that game as well. He ended up throwing for over 300 yards, but if y'all remember, a lot of that came in the second half. Notre Dame had 576 yards of offense that game. That was the most they had all year by 18 yards of 6.78 yards per play. They were really cooking that day. There's no doubt about it. And they shut down the North Carolina run game. And it was really the first, okay, this team might be all right moment of the 22 season, Trev, where you looked at it and you look at this North Carolina team and you think about what they were then, right? And then kind of how they've evolved. Then they were really talented on offense. And then remember, they played 2 years before. Actually, they played that was the third straight game they played North Carolina. They played them in 2021. That was a game where Kyron rips off the 90-plus yard touchdown run. And then in 2020, they played as well. And that was the really good Sam Howell, Javonte Williams, Michael Carter team. And you had a really good receiving core. But you look at it, it was a completely offensive-driven team. I think when I fast forward to kind of 2026, we have a lot of questions about their offense, Trev, especially at quarterback. What I think we're going to see from North Carolina this year is a team that's going to be, in my opinion, much improved on the defensive side of the ball this year. Obviously, with Bill Belichick running the show, his son, Steven, I believe, is still his defensive coordinator, I believe. But you look at North Carolina, Trev, and you look at kind of where they were before Coach Belichick showed up, to make the point that I just made. In 2020, North Carolina was an 8-4 team, ranked in the top 25. The next year, they were again a bowl team. In 2022, they won 9 games, almost beat Oregon and Dan Lanning in a bowl game. Lost games by 4 points, 3 points, 1 point. Like, they were pretty good back then, but their defense was terrible. They gave up 29.4 points a game in 2020, gave up 32.1 in 2021, 30.8. Think about that. They won 9 games that year. This is how people should have known Drake May was really flipping good. They won 9 games in 2022 and still gave up 30.8 points per game. 2023, 27.3, and 2024, 28.1. So they've been bad on defense the whole time. Year one of Bill Belichick, they dropped down to 24.5. Like best that they've had in a number of years. And I think we're going to see that be even better in 2026. There's some guys coming back that we're very high on. There's 2 returners that we had on our all-opponent defensive line. We both had Melkart Abu-Juwadi at defensive end. He had a monster year last year coming over out of the portal. Was a very impressive player for North Carolina last year. Transferred from Delaware. Had 12 tackles for loss, 10.5 sacks last season, Trev. Very productive season, 47 tackles. Big, tall, long kid, pretty solid athlete. Isaiah Johnson I had on my, I think, second team, all-opponent team at defensive tackle, big kid. Yep. And you look at their defensive line, and one of the biggest reasons that I have some optimism about this defense is there's a lot of there's some portal additions, obviously. Donovan Hulett, defensive end. You got Peyton Seelman at linebacker, Derek McDonald at linebacker. You've got Adi Willie at corner. But they're primarily about kids coming back. Their secondary returns a lot of guys. I mean, not all of them are starters, but it looks like 3 to 4 of their starters are guys that are returners. Not all of them are returners to the starting lineup, but guys that are returners from the system. So they're not having to completely overhaul the system. And when you watched them play last year, some of the issues that they would have on defense is they'd have blown assignments, they'd have guys out of position because they were learning a relatively complicated system. So now that you got a lot of talent coming back, they've got a decent D-line. There's not a lot of good D-lines in the schedule. Little preview of what we're going to talk about at the end. This has a chance to be one of the better D-lines in the schedule after you get past like Miami and like a BYU. This is one of the to me, one of the 3 or 4 best D-lines are going to face all year. And now you've got a bunch of secondary players that are going into year 2 of the system. Talent's okay, but I think that's why I have a lot of optimism that North Carolina was okay last year on defense. This year, I think they have a chance to be a lot better. And honestly, Trevor, to have a defense that you could see, really make some big strides as they go throughout the season. And the big key is like they're going to have to be more consistent in the run game. That's going to be a big thing. Last year, they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games where they held opponents to less than 90 yards, but then they also had games where they gave up 258 to TCU, 223 to Wake, gave up 185 to NC State. So they were hit or miss, man. Like they did not have a single game where they gave up between 145 and 222 yards, not one. But they had 1, 2, 3, 4. Between 145 and 175. Not one game in that range. It was always 177 or more, or 90 or less. 143 or less. There's a lot there. Half their games are 90 or less than 90, almost. And so, very hit or miss. But I think that kind of plays into the whole. You're not quite locked into what you're being asked to do, and you're being asked to do a lot of difficult things. And so. When I look at the North Carolina defense, that's a big reason I expect them to be improved this season. And again, they weren't bad last year. Like if you look at their like total yards last year, Trev, they ranked 38th in the country in total defense last season, and they ranked 25th in yards allowed per play. They have a lot of guys coming back from that defense, so that's why I think North Carolina is going to be a better player. Or a better defense this year, even than they were last year. And they were a pretty solid defense last year.
Agreed completely. And their defense is one of the reasons why we're a little bit higher on them than some. I mean, for example, our friends over at FanDuel have them at a 4.5 over-under win total, which to varying degrees I understand because we have a lot of questions about their offense. But Melkart Abu-Juwadi is going to be one of the best defensive ends that Notre Dame faces all season, regardless of the logo on his helmet and the school that he plays for. The tackles will be tested. The offensive line will go through some tests in that game. But I echo everything that you said about the Tar Heels. It's not a surprise that if there was a strength of a Bill Belichick defense or of a Bill Belichick team, it's the defense. There's a lot of questions about him carrying over from the NFL to North Carolina, but I'm also curious to see what kind of adjustments he's going to make now that he has a year of college football under his belt. Exactly. Will he simplify some of that defense to play and cater more to the strengths of, 18, 19, 20-year-olds versus having 25, 26, 27-year-olds? I'll be very fascinated to see what he does.
And then also adapting to how college football is run I mean, offenses are different. There's things you do differently in college football than you do in the NFL. And you talk about Bill Belichick and obviously, coached the most winningest quarterback ever. Some people think he's the greatest quarterback ever. They had some great offenses. You think of the Randy Moss, Rob Gronkowski, Tom Brady offense that lost to the Giants in the Super Bowl. But how did they make their bones early on under Bill Belichick? It was playing great defense. I mean, you think of them shutting down the greatest show on turf in the Super Bowl. Sorry to my guy, Ryan Roberts, for bringing that up. I know that's, Ryan's a Rams fan, so that one probably still stings, like when people bring up Broncos losing games. But Super Bowls, but they built themselves on being great on defense. Then eventually Brady becomes, the guy that we know, and offenses become more impactful. But like, that's how he built New England. And I think that's how he's trying to build North Carolina. It's like, look, we're going to be salty on defense, and then we'll try. Eventually they want to do something better on offense. But he didn't come in running some gimmicks, and we're going to, throw the ball over the yard and score a million points. It's like, hey, we need to establish being good on defense. We saw a significant improvement in year one from what they've been the last almost decade. And I think we're going to see another jump for sure. Let's talk number 4, Trev. Let's dive into the Wisconsin Badgers. I think Wisconsin is a team we had also, I believe, in our offense last week. They're also in the defense, which is why when you guys hear us do the whole schedule, why we felt that Wisconsin is going to be a much improved team. We got the Badgers as the number 4 defense on the Notre Dame schedule.
In the spirit of talking about teams whose defenses might have been a little bit better than what they're perceived to be because of their overall record, Wisconsin absolutely fits that bill. Obviously, they gave up 38 points to Alabama on the road, but I started to really pay attention to, especially after their October 11th and October 18th. I mean, you gave up 37 points to Iowa and then 34 the following week to Ohio State. Both were home games. Their route to finish the end of the regular season, though, against really good competition was impressive. They held Oregon to 21 points on the road. They held Washington to 10 points in an upset win in Madison. IU had the Heisman winner at quarterback. They scored 31 points, but at one point, that game was 10-7, I believe, going into halftime.
At halftime, it was 10-7, yes.
They upset Illinois at home. They were ranked at the time, held them to 10 points. And then against Minnesota on the road, their defense only allowed 17 points. When your offense only puts up 7, it's going to be real difficult to win football games like that. But all of that encompassing is one of the reasons why we're a little bit higher on Wisconsin's defense than maybe what some other people are. You go through and you look at what they're bringing back, and they have some good pieces returning at every level. Matt Jung comes back at safety. Matt Posa comes back at linebacker. I believe Cooper Catalano also comes back at linebacker. So they have some pieces, and then they also picked up some interesting guys in the portal as well. Justice Boone comes over from Arkansas. Notre Dame faced him last year when he was still with the Razorbacks. Remade back end of the defense, but being held together by Matthew Jung at safety. Wisconsin has some pieces that we both kind of like.
And I really like Bryce West coming over from Ohio State. He's one of those kids that's a talented football player. He just happened to go to Ohio State at the wrong time. Because they're so deep there with veterans when he got there. And then, of course, they bring in guys like Devin Sanchez and players like that. Like, that's a kid that can play at that level, in my opinion. And I think that was a very good pickup. He doesn't have a lot of experience, but I think he's got a lot of talent.
He's kind of like their Cree Thomas, just timing about coming to the program. It's 100%. Very similar.
It's a great example. There's some concern I have about what they lost. That was a bit of a concern when you first start diving into what they're doing defensively. Obviously, you mentioned some of the guys that got back. They did have some personnel losses on the D line, some depth players. Linebacker got hit really hard. They also lost Mason Rieger, Christian Allegro, Daryl Peterson transfers out. They lost, in my opinion, their best DB, their 2 best DBs last year, 2 of their best DBs last year, including some of their depth. Pressman Zachman went to Indiana. They lost Christian Allegro to Ohio State. So they had some personnel losses, but they played a lot of guys too, Trev. That's the other side of the coin. Is like a linebacker, they lost Mason Rieger was a big time, edge rusher for them at line. He's a linebacker. Him and Sebastian Cheeks are listed at linebacker, but they're really edges. But you lost Christian Allegro, who had, a really good season last year. Daryl Peterson had a productive season last year. They lost Tackett Curtis, who transferred. He was a productive player last year. Aaron Witt is out of eligibility. He was a part of the rotation last year. But then they also returned Mason Posa, who was their one of their leading tacklers. They also respond Cooper Catalan, bring him back. Sebastian Cheeks comes back on the edge. And then, of course, they went to the portal and got John Kamara out of the portal for depth. So, yeah, they lost some guys, but then there's some good players that played a lot coming back. And same thing is true in the secondary. They lost some very invaluable secondary pieces. But as you mentioned, they bring back Matthew Jung. They bring back De'Ani Hill. And then they just completely – they had a lot of guys they brought in through the portal. And the one thing that you can say about Luke Fickell, and there's some strong opinions on Luke Fickell, but the guy knows how to coach defense. Yeah. And defense is not the reason they've stunk since he got there. I mean, his first year they gave up 20.2 points per game. They gave up 23.1 the next year, gave up 21.6 last year. And there were games, Trev, where they were giving up 37, 38 points in a game, and it wasn't because of their defense necessarily. I mean, they lost to Iowa 37-0. They only gave up 319 points, Trev, and 5.2 yards per play. They lose 31-7 Indiana. They held Indiana 388 yards last season. They lose a game at Minnesota where they hold them to 17 points and 218 yards per game. So Maryland beats them 27-10. They only gave up 326 yards. I mean, Bama ripped them up pretty good. Michigan ripped them up pretty good. And Ohio State ripped them up pretty good. They held Oregon to 335 yards of offense. That's it. So you look at it, they have not been like elite on defense, but they've been real solid on defense in all of Luke Fickell's 3 seasons there. And they've gotten better every year to some degree. Like, first year to 2 were slight improvement. They went from 344 yards per game in 23. That drops down to 342.7, higher in yards per play. But then this past year was significantly better than those other 2 years from a total yard standpoint. Yards per play were about what they were the year before, it's 5.4, but they were down to 323.5 yards per game. The reason they stunk last year, Travis, because they only averaged 253.1 yards per game on offense. That's the reason Oregon stunk last year. And that put a heavy burden on their defense. They had to lock people down. This year, I think their offense should be better. I think it's going to take some of the pressure off the defense, and I think it's going to make the defense better. But there's good talent. I would argue that North Carolina has more high-end talent than Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin has really good depth, and especially with the portal class they brought in, as Trevor has been saying for months. I mean, you've written about this at Irish Breakdown. You've talked about it in shows. They had a sneaky good portal class this year under Luke Fickell, and I think that's especially true on defense.
Agreed 100%. We could also say the same about the number 3 team on this list about having a good portal class, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and that's the SMU Mustangs. They're a team where, like we've talked about before, there's 3 clear-cut teams above the rest on Notre Dame's schedule, and SMU is one of those teams. I have some questions about them on defense. I'm never a big fan of when an entire position group of starters gets remade through the transfer portal, but to Brian's point that he made earlier in the show, we've seen more examples of defenses being able to do this than offense. But what I love about SMU is what they bring back, especially on the back end of their defense. I think they're going to have one of the better linebacking cores that Notre Dame is going to face in the regular season, bringing back Alexander Kilgore and Brandon Booker. And then on their secondary, Marcellus Barnes, I believe, was on both of our all-opponent teams, wasn't he?
Just yours.
Okay.
Just yours. But he was in the consideration for mine. But you and I had a different SMU players on our all-opponent team defense.
Gotcha.
I had the linebacker. You didn't. You had Barnes. I don't think I did. I think that speaks to, though, Trev, kind of the depth that they have of potentially good football players on their unit, because we didn't have we both had 3, and it was the same 3 guys. We had multiple different players. Like I had Brandon Booker, I think, on my second team all linebacker unit. You didn't. That doesn't mean that you don't think he's good. Like I don't think Marcellus Barnes is good. It's just like, look, there's a lot of guys that were in conversation for who's going to be on our all-opponent team. And of course, it helps that they got, Notre Dame graduate running their defense this year too. Mo Crum now becomes the primary driver of that defense after being co-coordinator. They lost a guy that was the primary driver this offseason, and now Mo is going to be the one driving it. But yeah, the point is, Trev, is, I think SMU also is a team that has shown an ability to, because to me, it's like there's 2 ways to debate this. One is, okay, in theory, can you rebuild a defense through the portal and be really good? Yes, that's been proven. Okay, that's fine. But does this team have a track record of doing that? And I think that's certainly something we've seen from SMU in their tenure in the last couple of years under Rhett Lashley. Is you look at their defense last year, and they lost Cam Robertson. He was a transfer. He came in from North Texas. They lost Terry Webb. He played a bunch for them. He was from Texas State. They lost Jeffrey Mba. He was from Purdue and Auburn. They lost Kavion Spears, who was part of their D-line rotation. He was a transfer from Memphis and Louisiana Tech. They lost DJ Warner, who was played a little bit as a pass rusher for them. He had transferred in from Kansas and Washington State. He actually transferred out to Washington State. He transferred in from Texas. So, like, they've been doing this. You look at linebacker. They lose Zaki Barker. He transferred in from East Carolina. He transfers out. Justin Medlock transfers in from Utah. He then transfers to BYU. So they're kind of having these issues where these guys transfer in and out, but they've shown that they can kind of rebuild the same way. And I think that's why there's a little bit more faith, in my opinion. Deuce Harmon was a really good player for them last year at corner. He transferred in from Texas A&M. So there's a proven track record here with this particular staff that they can take portal guys and rebuild. But the other part about it too, Trevor, is they're not really doing that on the back end. It's all up front. And that's where I think we've seen it's even easier to rebuild through the portal, because there's not as much the communication that you see at linebackers, even more extensive. The communication you see in the secondary is even more extensive. And that's why teams that rebuild in those areas can maybe tend to have more issues, unless you have a coach like Corey Heatherman who says, hey, we're going to make things a little bit more easy to grasp early on and not put a million things on them and then get better as the year goes on. And that's when I look at SMU. I think that's what they've shown that they can do. And I think their linebacking core is going to be in our conversation when we rank position groups. We'll rank the linebackers and rank those. The SMU linebacking core is going to be in the conversation for is this one of the best, if not the best linebacker room that Notre Dame's going to play this year?
Agreed. One of the things that SMU will need from their portal defensive linemen, because they brought in some talent. The question is just who's going to be emerged to be that guy. Right now, they have 5 transfer portal defensive linemen in there 2 deep. And is it going to be Malcolm Alcorn Crowder? Is it going to be Marquise White? There are some good candidates here and players coming over who are very productive. It's just the question for them now is who steps up for Mo Crumb's defense. Because to your point, their linebacking core could be very, very good. We've also seen linebacking cores get neutralized if there's just kind of okay defensive line play. They brought in the talent. Now we just got to see them do it, but I'm confident that they can because they have that track record, to your point.
Let me ask you this question, Trevor. Do you think if we are incorrect that SMU is 3rd, do you see we're incorrect because they're lower, or do you think we'll be incorrect because they're higher? And when I mean incorrect, not that they miss them by a spot, but just incorrect and just flat out. We had them 3, they're not 3. Let's assume that everybody else is exactly what we think they're going to be, just for the sake of argument. This is what I'm trying to go with this. If we're wrong about SMU, do you think it's because they're not as good as we think they're going to be, or because they're even better based on all the things that we've talked about? What are your thoughts on that?
In my eyes, I think if how I evaluate it, if we miss on SMU, if I miss on SMU, I think it's because we had them too high, because there's a little bit too much faith into 4 transfer portal D linemen all just working out. Sure. Now, there's been a track record of that happening at multiple places, and to your point about SMU, but I think that's where I might miss the boat of just chalking it up to they've done it before with a different set of players. I like the back end of their defense, but even with it missing, I'll go as far to say this, they're still going to be a top 5 defense that Notre Dame plays, but if we miss, maybe they're closer to 4 if everybody else plays the same that they're supposed to.
I like that answer. I actually am the other way. If everybody else is as expected, because there's a world in which they're 4 and they're better than we think, but North Carolina takes a real big jump and Wisconsin takes a real big jump, or Michigan State takes a real big jump, and then they end up being lower. But that's why I had to throw those caveats in, because if everybody else is kind of what we expect, I think the fact that you and I disagree on this is exactly what sort of I would say concern is for SMU this year, because I think there's a chance they're even better than expected, because I like the talent. Yeah. And I like the fact that this coaching staff has shown that they can put a good defense on the field. I think the fact that there is some continuity at linebacker, there is some continuity in the secondary at certain spots, I think bodes well for them. But I think that's a little bit of a concern, though, right, Trev? Is that there is that unknown of what's up front, and you looked at it from the standpoint of, and that's your personality is more of like okay, I need to see it, and there's a lot I need to see from the D line that's raising concerns, and then I look at it more from the optimistic. Boy, if those guys all hit, this D line could be really good, and I don't think either position is wrong, but I think that's the concern if you're SMU. That's the thing that's going to hold them back, because offensively, we have no concerns. If anything, they could be higher.
Yeah.
They could end up being the second best offense on the schedule this year behind I think we had them second, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
They could be one of the top 10 to 12 offenses in all of college football this year with the offensive line they have, the quarterback, the skill at receiver. Like, that's a legit, really good offense. This season is going to come down to their ability to take this remade defensive line and say, what level can you get it to play at? And because I actually thought you were going to go with better, because you had some of those transfer D linemen on your all opponent team. But what you said makes complete sense. I think that's sort of that's right there. You just defined what's going to determine how good BYU is this year. Is that dichotomy between, yes, there's a lot of talent there individually. You had two guys on your all opponent team, but as a collective with the unknowns, here's the concern. And which one of those does the good individual talent come together and play really well as a unit? If it does, I think they're the second best defense on the schedule as well. If it doesn't, then they could fall and not even get passed by teams, just fall below teams. So that's an interesting one. This has got a potential to be this is why Trevor and I are a lot higher on SMU as a team than maybe some other people, because I think the talent's really good. I think you nailed the concern, Trev. Can they get it to play together right away?
The level of variance with SMU's defense is fascinating, which is why when we get questions about, hey, is there a chance that SMU walks into Notre Dame Stadium on November 21st undefeated? And when we read those questions, we're like, guys, come on, it's SMU. They're not going to be undefeated. It's a completely reasonable question to ask. But a lot of it will come down to that level of variance that we're talking about. One program, however, that I don't think has as much variance, and this is kind of a common theme between what we talked about on offense, is BYU. I think what they are what they are in both phases, and that is that of a really good football team. Not meant to be a shot, especially on defense. I have questions about their skilled talent on offense. I don't have a lot of questions about their skilled talent on defense. When you return Terry and Alexander and Evan Johnson and that safety that led the team in tackles, and the back end of your defense is fine. You get Kedu Olave from Cal to transfer into your linebacking core to go along with Isaiah Glasker. You're in a good spot. I have questions about BYU's defensive line, but it's different from my questions about SMU's offensive line. I think the overall talent ceiling for SMU's D-line is higher than BYU's. Right now, they're more of a known commodity because they've all played together. There's only one portal guy estimated or projected to be in the starting lineup for BYU, and that's Kedu Olave, who had like 90-plus tackles last year with Cal. So it's going to be a very disciplined, fundamentally sound defense. My question is, outside of the two corners, the level of talent, their ceiling of talent, which is why they're ahead of SMU now. But it's why when you said that you could see SMU being higher, I don't think that's a crazy thought at all.
You didn't go like this. You didn't give me one of those. Like, what? This guy's crazy. Which I appreciate, by the way. You're like, oh, I did that on the inside. I just didn't let you see that. I definitely
wait till you see the text I sent you, bro. No.
Hey, what's that private message you just sent me in the thing, Trev? Oh, I'm out of my mind for thinking. Okay, cool. Thanks. No, look, here's the thing with BYU. This is their ceiling as a defense. And if anything, I worried that their defense maybe takes a step back. And here's why. You're spot on. They have, in my opinion, they're in the conversation for best secondary on the schedule with Miami. I'd probably lean towards Miami now because I think Miami's got a lot better depth. And that other safety spot for BYU, we'll see. Best cornerback group on the roster, if we're just talking starters, yeah, I think so. Again, Miami's got more depth. That's where that debate lies, but they're in there. I think they're a top 10 secondary in college football. I continue to see people rank secondaries in the top 10 and not have them, and I just think that's a bad eval. I think their linebacker room has a chance to be very good this season, especially if Isaiah Glasker gets back to being what he was in 2024.
Yeah.
Here's my big concern, Trev, and I can't believe this is my concern with BYU. I don't love their line. I really don't. I think it's big, strong kids. It's their physical. I think they should be pretty decent against the run. But where's the pressure coming from? Keanu Tanavasa is going to be very important for them. We even said we had him on our second team all-opponent team more out of just who else is going to be there. Bodie Schoonover is a really big physical kid. But when I looked at their D-line last year, I think one of the big problems they had when they played Texas Tech those two times is Texas Tech was able to bully them a little bit in the trenches. And I don't think that was a great Texas Tech offensive line. And so when I look at BYU, it's the toughness. They're not real big though. And the other part of it is the ability to get pressure on the quarterback is a big concern for me because I don't think they have the same level of athleticism on the front end as they do on the back end. And that's a bit of a concern. They're leading pass like last year from a pressure standpoint, Trev. Their leader last year was a linebacker, and he had 29 pressures. That's the same number that Bryce Young had.
Yeah.
And that's a bit of a concern is when you're playing teams like Notre Dame, when you're playing teams like Texas Tech, if you're not able to do a better job of putting pressure on the quarterback, you're going to be in trouble. And when you look at their numbers last year, I think it was that inability to consistently put pressure on the quarterback that was a bit of their downfall. They had decent sack numbers, 30 sacks last year and it'd be 14 games. That's okay. But it just, there wasn't a level of consistent pressure from them. You look, for example, you look at their numbers in 14 games, they had 235 pressures last year and 71 hits plus sacks on a quarterback. And then you compare that to like Texas Tech, who's in their league. They had 298 pressures. So that's they played one same number of games, but they had 50, 60 something more pressures, but then over almost 30 more hits plus sacks on a quarterback. You look at Notre Dame last year as a team that obviously that you and I know very well. Notre Dame had 295 pressures. This is why I keep saying like, oh, Notre Dame's D-line wasn't good last year. Notre Dame in 12 games had 3 fewer pressures in 12 games than what Texas Tech had in 14 with how good their defensive line was. And Notre Dame had 85 hits plus sacks on a quarterback, 14 more than what BYU had in 2 fewer games. That's my concern about BYU. If their line can't be more disruptive this season, Trevor, I think that could somewhat negate just how good I think that their secondary is. And that's a bit of a concern for me.
Agreed. Like we've seen what it looks like when you don't, what was the phrase that Marcus Freeman used last year? Like marry up the coverage in the front. And I do have some of those concerns for BYU. I have all the confidence in the world that Terrion Alexander and Evan Johnson are a top cornerback duo in all of college football. But even the best cornerback duos in college football can be neutralized because there's a finite amount of time that top level corners can cover opposing wide receivers. Yep. And you think of the league that BYU plays in, they're going to face Notre Dame, who has a host of talent at wide receiver. They're going to have their hands full. I'm with you. If their defensive line can answer that question and get pressure on the quarterback, because I'm with you, I'm confident in their ability to be stout against the run. If they can answer that question of who can get after the quarterback, I think BYU solidifies their position at number 2, but they're going to need to be more productive than what they were last year from that standpoint. I'm with you completely.
I will say this. I do think there's a world in which they do that, and SMU still ends up being better. But it'd be just a very, talent. Very close, yeah. just because the raw athleticism, but it'd be very, very close. Very, very close. I think the thing that would separate BYU in that instance, Trevor, is that I think that BYU would be better on the back end. So if the front sevens are of equal talent, then BYU maybe gets the edge because of that. But that's the thing is they're going to need some guys to kind of step up and provide more pressure on the quarterback. But I think this is the defense that we have the most knowns about. I think this is the defense that it is what it is. And that's why I don't know that we're going to see a big jump. Like, who's the guy that comes out of nowhere to become that edge rusher? Well, for North Carolina last year was the kid that transferred from Delaware that was better than people expected. I don't know that there's that young up-and-coming guy like, oh, wait till you get a load of this guy. I don't know who that would be for BYU, and I think that's a little bit of my concern when I'm comparing them and I'm talking about them this season. I think that's where if they don't live up to expectations, I think that's the reason why. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying if that's the case, that would be the reason why. Because I think it forces them. They're going to have to bring their linebackers a lot. And if a team has a good protection scheme or good offensive line and they can pick those backers up, there's going to be some ISO matchups that you're going to be able to take advantage of. And like you said, you're going to be able to give your receivers more time to get open against what is a really good secondary. Let's get into number one, Trev. This one is an obvious no-brainer one.
Yeah, the Miami Hurricanes are number one overall on our list because they check a lot of the boxes that we're looking for. They have top-level talent. They have proven production. They have returners coming back. They have good depth at certain spots. And right now, they're the best defense that Notre Dame is going to face. A lot of people have paid attention to what they've lost, and it's an understandable conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You lose guys like Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor to the first round of the NFL draft, but in a similar light to what we've kind of countered with Notre Dame losing Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price in the first round of the NFL draft, they have guys that are going to be willing to step up. And they're not just relying on Marquise Lightfoot and Armando Blunt to be those guys. They went out and got Damon Wilson, one of the most productive edge players in the country. They returned Justin Scott and Ahmed Moten. They picked up Keanu Davis
out of the portal. Yeah, Jarquez Carter from the portal.
From Ohio State. Yes, sir. I mean, and then they were able to go get Omar Thornton. He's one of their portal pickups that doesn't get talked about as much. I'll be interested to see where they use him because they're relying on him to, I think, replace – oh, gosh, what was his name? Keontae Scott. I think they're relying on him to replace him.
Is he going to replace him or Jacoby Thomas? I have to look. Let me look at their depth chart.
I'll have to go
see
look.
That one. They've got Omar projected to be their nickel, according to our lads. Now I don't know, because you got Zechariah Poyser and Bryce Fitzgerald at safety. So yeah, to be that nickel spot.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be interested to see how they use him. He's coming over from Boston College, and he was athletically, I think he takes a back seat to Keontae Scott. I think Keontae Scott's a better overall athlete. We'll see how he fits in there, but there's still
he's going to be physical.
Yeah.
You're going to good luck hitting the perimeter against Miami if he takes well to that. Yeah, he's a physical kid.
Yeah, 100%. But I think their defensive line is going to be just fine. That doesn't mean that they're going to repeat the level of success that they had in the postseason last year. But I think their D-line is going to be just fine. Mohamed Toure comes back for, I believe, his 8th season of college football. And then I think, according to our lads, Chase Smith is stepping up. But I'm also interested to see what Kamal Bonner does. He transferred over from NC State, I think, last year. But he wasn't fully healthy, fully good to go. Now he's at like a full year removed from that injury. So we'll see what contributions they get from him. And right now they have one of the most complete secondaries that Notre Dame is going to face. OJ Frederick comes back. Bryce Fitzgerald is coming off of like a 6 interception true freshman year. Zechariah Poyser's coming back. Xavier Lucas is coming back. So they have a lot of experience there as well. I like Miami's defense. It'll be a test for them.
Yeah, look. Somebody in the chat earlier was talking about like the D line. There was a question from Aiden Benami. He said, "Are people underestimating how good Miami's D line can be with their replacements overall? I think they can be close to last year minus one good D end." I said, "Well, look, man, we're not gonna I don't think we're underestimating." He said, "Not you guys." He's talking about more of like a national football. I don't know that they're being underestimated because I think there is an expectation that they're going to kind of reload a little bit there, to be honest with you. So I think the thing is it's going to be different. And here's the challenge for Corey Heatherman is you had your 2 DNs play a certain brand of football because they were built a certain way and they were twitchy and physical and powerful. This group is not that. Damon Wilson is a pass rusher. And that's why get into a little debate with Spencer. He'll DM me with questions and we'll discuss things. And I really enjoy that. He's a Miami fan, but he's like, Damon Wilson's better than Boubacar Toure. Based on what? Like people that like Pro Football Focus, well, Boubacar had a higher overall grade last year. You could argue that Damon's a better pass rusher. That's fair. He had better pass rusher numbers, but Boubacar was a much better run defender than what Damon was at Miami. So what am I saying? Am I trying to talk down Damon Wilson? No, I'm saying he's going to play the game differently than what we saw from Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Bain last year. That's the whole point. So Corey Heatherman's going to have to then lean into that and how he plays the game. Marquise Lightfoot, for example, plays the game a little bit of a different way. Now, I think Armando Blunt brings a little bit more of that style of play. 6'4", 265, physical type of guy. I'm very curious if they're going to start Blunt and Wilson with Lightfoot kind of being or does he start and then however you do it. But, you've got some younger players on the depth chart. I think Miami's going to still be very good on the defensive line. Getting Keona Davis out of the portal from Nebraska is good. It's just going to be different. It's not going to be as did you see 24-year-old Akeem Messidor just grown man that offensive tackle, right? It's going to be different. I think this Miami defensive line is going to be more about athleticism and quickness and just speed rushing and twists and stunts. I think it's going to be a little different than what last year's was, but I think it's still going to be just as disruptive in my opinion. And so that's why I think Miami's still going to be very good up front, and they're going to be really good at D tackle. The thing for them is that's the position, though, where I'm a little concerned if they have a major injury, meaning one of Scott or Bowden. They're not as deep as they were last year, in my opinion. And now, Keona Davis can play D tackle, but I think part of the value of having Keona Davis is he's a swing guy. He can play end, he can play inside. I don't know that I want him playing all full time inside, and I think that takes a little bit from him. So you're going to need to stay healthy on the inside. Jarquez Carter's didn't play a lot at Ohio State, liked him out of high school. Notre Dame offered him. He's a good player. Is he ready to kind of step into that? That's a little bit of the question marks if those guys are going to have to step up. But I think defensive end, they're still going to be very athletic. They're going to be deep. They're going to have different players they're going to throw at you. It's on the inside that they've got to kind of figure some things out. But linebacker, I think that's the position on defense, Trev, where I do think there's a chance they take a little bit of a step back. But it's going to be minor. I'm not sure that I see a Wesley Basaint on their roster.
Agreed.
That's a question that I have. As Raul Aguirre, I liked him coming out of high school. He transferred out. That's a position where somebody that didn't do a whole lot last year is going to have to step up and do a lot more this year. Maybe it's Chase Smith. I don't know. They didn't get a linebacker in the portal. They must like what they have. I don't remember seeing Miami's name mentioned with a lot of linebackers in the portal, so I don't know that it was something that they went after, but that's a position where I think a minor step back. I think they're going to be just fine in the secondary. I think they're going to be every bit as good as they were last year, maybe better, and here's why I think maybe better. Yes, you lost your nickel. Yes, you lost Jacoby Thomas. You lost Keontae Scott. No, those are question marks, but you have to look at it from this standpoint. Everyone's going into now year 2 of the Corey Heatherman defense. You're now another year of Ethan O'Connor in the system. You've got another year of Xavier Lucas in the system, another year of OJ Frederick in the system, another year of Zechariah Poyser in the system. So there's greater understanding of what they can do, and I think that kind of that'll elevate them a little bit, in my opinion. And then, of course, they also had some good pickups from the high school level last year. But that's kind of where I'm at, Trevor. Where I think the secondary is going to be just fine. They've got one of the better depth charts at cornerback. I think there's some debate to have how good is their starting cornerback. Like Miami fans kind of want to put their starting corners and they're on the same levels like Notre Dame's, and I don't see that. OJ Fredericks is as good as Leonard. No, he's not. But they've got 4 guys, I think, that can start that are really good football players. And I think that's the thing I like is maybe you don't have a Leonard Moore, but just the depth at corner. Where Miami could lose one of their starters and be fine. BYU loses one of their starters, they're in trouble. There's just not that same guy behind them. And that's why I think the Miami secondary is not going to miss a beat this year. And I think they might actually be even a little bit better than they were last year. Up front, let's see how they do against the run. I think they're going to be very good pass rushers. Let's see against run linebacker. So there's some things that maybe aren't as good, but greater knowledge of the system. Some areas where they may not be as strong as last year, but better in others. At the end of the day, I think this Miami defense is still going to be really, really good. The question is going to be in the regular season, can they be more consistent? They were lights out against Notre Dame. They were lights out in the postseason. But in the middle is when we saw them have some issues. The focus, the lack of focus against Louisville and SMU. Can they eliminate that? I think that ultimately is going to be something that determines as a team if Miami can be a top 4 to 5 seed this year. Like I think they should be. Can they have that focus? And I think that's especially true on defense. There were times where it just looked in the middle of the season like Ruben Bain was just kind of like packing it, mailing it in. And then we get to the playoffs, you're like, oh, that's the Ruben Bain I remember from week 1. I've pointed this out before. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, Ruben Bain's going to be so hard to replace. Yeah, compared to what he did in the postseason. Once they get to the postseason, do they have anyone that can do in the postseason what Ruben Bain did in the postseason? I don't know. But I keep wanting to remind people, like, y'all do know that Ruben Bain only had 7.5 tackles for loss in the regular season, right? That's it. He had 8 tackles for loss in the postseason. Yeah, well, he had 9.5 sacks. Yeah, 5 of them were in the postseason. He had 4.5 sacks in the regular season. It's not going to be that hard to replace what Ruben Bain did in the regular season. Am I wrong? Nope. 7.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. You don't think Damon Wilson can replace that? The question is, can you get Akeem Messidor was a little different story. When he was healthy, he was good throughout the year and in the postseason. It's the postseason where you've got to say, okay, I don't know if they can replace that. But the regular season, I mean, with all due respect, Notre Dame fans remember the Miami game because they dominated Notre Dame's offensive line. They didn't do that all year. Until when, Trev? They got to the postseason, and they're like, okay, it matters again. Let's go ball. They need to be that more consistently. That's going to determine whether or not Miami's 10-2 and fighting for a playoff spot again for the 3rd year in a row, or if they just run through the ACC and they're, one of those top 4 to 5 seeds along with the Notre Dames and the Ohio States and the Texases and teams of Georgia's, the teams that we think are going to be battling for those spots this year.
Agreed. If they're able to stack consistency, and there's a little bit of sympathy of that from a Notre Dame standpoint. When you have the level of talent that Miami does, that Notre Dame does, there are times when opponents like an SMU or like a Louisville can kind of look ahead to other games, and you start looking ahead to the postseason because of the level of talent. If they're able to stay focused, they're going to be a top defense in the country, not just a top defense on Notre Dame's schedule. But be very interested to see how all that pans out. I'm with you completely.
Yeah. Let's wrap this up real quick, Trev, just with a quick look at when we look at the 3 levels, just a quick thought of, is this an area of strength for the opposition, an area of concern, or TBD? Start off on the D-line. I think there's some really good D-lines at the top. I think there's not a lot after that. I think overall this is a year where, based on what we know now, based on the portal, there's maybe 3 to 4 pretty good off defensive lines on the schedule. After that, major question marks. I don't think this is going to be something that raises the level of concern the way that it did last year when we were looking at that Miami line with Ruben Bain and Messidor, and you were looking at the Texas A&M line and just kind of projecting forward to some of the defensive lines we thought we were going to face last year. Top heavy, not a lot of depth. It's not a great year for the Notre Dame opposing defensive lines.
Agreed completely. We're going to be talking outside of the Miami game about a lot of individual matchups on the defensive line for Notre Dame this year. Like how does Will Black and Gerby Lambert handle Mikel Abujade from North Carolina? Mm-hmm. Whereas for the Miami defensive line, it'll be a group effort. Mm-hmm. But for the majority of the season, we'll be talking a lot about individual matchups. I agree.
Linebacker, Trevor, this is a different story. This, in my opinion, is the best position group that Notre Dame faces top to bottom on the schedule. I think there are some secondaries that are really, really good. But when I look at linebacker, Trevor, I see a lot of good linebacking cores on the schedule. Like
even outside of this ranking. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, Michigan State has got a chance to have a really good linebacker room. They've got obviously Jordan Hall coming back. You got Deion Coleman transferring in. Like they've got a good linebacking core. North Carolina's, we'll see. Wisconsin should still be good at linebacker. Miami will be solid at linebacker. BYU is going to be really good at linebacker. SMU should be really good at linebacker. Purdue's got a chance to have a decent linebacker core this year with some guys they have a lot of transfers coming in that have some potential. You look at it, Trev, there's a lot of potentially good linebacker rooms. Stanford is another team that's got to have a chance of, Matt Rose comes back, but he's not alone. They've got to have a chance. They have a chance. Navy had 2 linebackers that we considered for our all opponent team. Navy's got a very good linebacker room. There's a lot of teams on the schedule that have good linebacker rooms. That's the best position group that Notre Dame will face off against this year is opposing linebackers.
Agreed 100%. They will face consistently good linebacker play throughout their schedule. Some higher than others, but I'm convinced that they will face off against some good linebacking cores. Secondary, I view very similar to the defensive line, where you got some pretty good secondaries up at the top, After that, it's kind of we'll wait and see.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Very top heavy. Very top heavy. And the problem is there's a lot of teams rebuilding in the portal. I think North Carolina could have a solid secondary. Wisconsin's got a chance to have a solid secondary. I think all the teams that we evaluated here have chances to be pretty good in the secondary. I think after this, there's a bit of a drop-off. Maybe Michigan State, maybe Purdue. Purdue had a couple, we'll talk about them in a little bit. But I think there's also some that are just not going to be very good at all. And so I would rank them up linebacker 1, secondary 2, D-line 3. That should bode well for the Notre Dame offensive line this season. They should be able to eat a lot this season.
Should. Brian, up next here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We're sticking with the conversation about Notre Dame's opponents, but we're going to focus on one specific one, their fourth opponent of the regular season, the Purdue Boilermakers, who they'll face off against in West Lafayette, Indiana. This is a game that I've circled on my calendar for a host of different reasons. Hopefully, one, they're able to repeat their performance the last time they took the trip to West Lafayette, where they won 66-7. Not banking on it. Definitely not banking on it yet, but this is a team with a head coach that's going into year 2 in Barry Odom, who came over from UNLV. Kind of a disappointing year last year. Was hoping to see a little bit more from him as a head coach, from Ryan Brown at quarterback. And as of right now, our friends over at FanDuel don't think they're going to be much better. Slightly. Their over-under win totals is set at 4.5. Depending on how you want to look at it, you could be looking at the under once again. But it's going to be a difficult year for Purdue and Barry Odom. But be interested to see what he does in his second year.
Yeah, I'm with you, Trev. I was a little disappointed by what they did last season. I thought Purdue was going to be a little bit better. I wasn't expecting them to be a bowl team by any stretch of imagination, but I think the concern that I had is that not only was their record not good, 2-10, which is what I think same record, that one game better than the year before.
Yep.
It's that they didn't really improve as much as I thought they were going to improve. I mean, they were better than they were the year before, but like literally it was almost impossible to not be better than what you were the year before. And, they weren't as bad on defense, but they were still bad. They were 39.9 points per game last year. They were 31.8. They weren't as bad on offense. They were at 15.8 in 2024, but they were only 18.8 last year. And that's the side of the ball I thought was the biggest disappointment. They absolutely should have been better on offense. I mean, they scored at least 30 points in 3 of their first 4 games and then didn't do it again the rest of the year. Scored 31 on Ball State, 34 on Southern Illinois, 30 on Notre Dame, which, is an issue. And then you had 3 games of 20 or more points, and then everything else after that was 17 or less. And the other part, too, is there again is a year where you weren't competitive in a lot of your losses. You were more competitive against USC, but you still lost by 16 and weren't in the game. You got blown out by Notre Dame. You got beat convincingly by Illinois. You lost by a touchdown to Minnesota. You got beat 19-0 to Northwestern. You lost to Rutgers by 3, Michigan by 5, but then you ended the season with a 24-point loss to Ohio State, a 36-point loss to Washington, and then a 53-point loss to Indiana. I think that was the concern, is like there didn't seem to be a lot of that growth. And then once again, boom, you go into year 2 and you're completely remaking your roster again. It's almost like they're mulligan and let's do this again and start over from scratch.
That's the most difficult thing to evaluate about Purdue, because it's almost the opposite story of Wisconsin. In the last segment, we were talking about how they're going to be one of the better defenses that Notre Dame faced. And after that gauntlet between October 11th and October 18th, when they gave up 37 points to Iowa, 38 points to Alabama, they gave up, 30-something points to Ohio State, they really started to lock in. Purdue, it's almost the opposite story. It's kind of like they phoned it in and they were already looking ahead to 2026, and hopefully that's going to be the year for them. But there are some facets of this team gives you some hope for confidence, but then there's others where it's like, okay, you have some of the same guys coming back who also phoned it in last year. Which version of Purdue are we going to see? Are they going to come out fired up, looking to build on whatever bright spots they had in 25, or is this going to be kind of like let's see if they can get above 4 wins? Because we're talking about a program that's been 0-18 in the Big Ten the last 2 years.
And not a lot of games where, like, if it just would have gone this way on a couple plays, there's been a couple games like that. But even in some of the games that were close, they were clearly not the better team on the field that day. And it was more about, boy, they laid an egg today, talking about the other team more so than like, wow, did you see Purdue battle that team? It was not a lot of that. So it was a rough year one for Barry Odom, and year two we're gonna find out. But I think that's the concern I had, Trev, is it wasn't competitive. I mean, you got outscored by 157 points last year in 12 games. That's not good. That's not good.
No, and their outlook for their schedule this season doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence that they're going to just right the ship and become a bowl eligible football team this year either.
Yeah, let's look at the schedule for 2026, Trev. 5 opponents on the schedule that they played last year. Notre Dame at home, they lost by 26 last year. The last time they played Notre Dame at home, as Trevor mentioned, they lost by 59. You got Illinois, a team they lost to at home last year by 16. Now they got to go to Illinois. They did have a close game against Minnesota. That was 27-20. They get them at home. They play Washington at home. They lost to Washington at Washington 49-16 last year. Having said that, Trev, you and I have talked about how Washington is a very different team when they travel east than they are at home. So maybe they can catch one. And then, of course, you end the season at Indiana, a team that has absolutely annihilated you the last 2 seasons. I mean, that is – they lost 56-3 this past year, and that was an improvement compared to 66-0. Think about that. 122-3 is what your rival Indiana has done to you the last 2 years. Then you look at the rest of their schedule, Trev. They've got Wake Forest at home. That was a 9-win team last year. They have to travel out to UCLA. I think it's a much improved roster from what it was last year. A new coach. Now, obviously, you played Notre Dame at home, at Illinois, home against Minnesota, home against Washington. And then you got to play at Penn State, home against Maryland, who might have one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And you're at Iowa, home against Wisconsin, at Indiana. The Big Ten did no favors for Barry Odom, and neither did the AD at Penn State or at Purdue, who gave him Wake Forest and Notre Dame in their non-conference. But it's not an easy schedule, Trev. I think Wake, see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the opponents, 8 of their 12 opponents last year were bowl eligible. That's going to be a tough one.
Yeah. It's a rough outlook when we say the Big Ten did them no favors to try to put them in a position to be bowl eligible, and they still don't play Ohio State. They still don't play Oregon. They still don't play Michigan. Like it's going to be tough sledding for Purdue.
It's almost like I'd rather have Oregon, Ohio State, and Michigan and Indiana on the schedule, but then after those 4, give me the next like 9 or would be 5 worst teams in the league. They just gave them a bunch of teams that, there's Indiana, but then it's like, okay, they don't have Ohio State or Oregon and Michigan, but then they've got like the next 6 teams in the Big Ten. You know what I mean? It's like, good Lord, that's not an easy schedule. And they don't, their home slate's going to be a challenge as well, Trev. I mean, Wake Forest is a 9-win team from last year. Notre Dame is going to beat them at home. Minnesota's a good football team. Washington's a good football team. Maryland wasn't very good last year, but they've got a very talented quarterback and some good athletes. And then Wisconsin wasn't very good last year, but Wisconsin's much improved. We think will be much improved. So the home slate is the thing that is like, boy, that's going to be tough too. It's not looking good for Barry Odom in year 2. But I'll tell you what, if they can win 4 to 5 games this year, that will be a really good improvement from last year. And I'm not saying that jokingly. To win 4 of these games, I would say, hey, that's a heck of a season for a brand new team that has won 3 total games the last 2 years.
Yeah, without a doubt, especially considering 2 of their 3 non-conference games are against Wake Forest and Notre Dame. But if Barry Odom's going to get there, he's going to have to do it with a roster that's basically being made up of portal players. Right now on our lads, there's 13 portal players projected just in the starting lineup. Now, they have some pieces coming back, which we'll talk about, but it's a very portal-heavy team this year for them.
But Trevin, I think you're even leaving out a part of that as well from the conversation because – yes. So if you look at our lads, there's 7 offensive players in the 2 deep and then 6 defensive players. That's your 13. But then look at the second string. There are, according to our lads, 5 offensive players in the second team on offense and then 7 players on the second team on defense. So you're talking about 13 players in the 2 deep on defense are portal guys, 12 players on offense are portal guys. So it's a brand new roster in a lot of ways, Trev. And that's why I say it's almost like Purdue said, this is a mulligan. We're going to completely rehaul the roster and just start over again. How well they did from an evaluation standpoint in the portal is going to have a big say. I will say this, Trev, there's some areas where I don't know what to expect from their portal class, but there's some other areas where I think that they've done well in the portal, and whether or not that is true or not is going to have a huge impact on this season. You and I talked about it. We like their receiver class in the portal. Xavier Townsend is a guy that Notre Dame was looking at slot receiver and as a return guy. They got him from Iowa State. You look at the Bissy Owens kid that they got from Penn. We've seen Ivy League kids go from to D1 schools and ball out. We saw obviously Cooper Barcotti did it last year. Kid that I'm very high on from, was it Colgate? The Reed Swanson kid that I really like at Boston College. The Owens last year was a first-team All-Ivy League kid, had 66 catches in 10 games. The year before that, had 35 catches for 538 yards. So this is a kid that's got some ability. 6'4", 215, big-bodied kid, solid athlete, smart, knows how to play. And then Asad Wasim at Florida Atlantic last year had 66 catches for 699 yards and 5 touchdowns. So I like that. We've talked before about the running back room that they put together, getting a kid from Iowa State and getting Jarrett Gibson from Texas. So there's some area. Jaden Mangum's a DB that they got from Michigan State. That's on my all-opponent portal team, or on my all-opponent team on defense, I should say. You talked about Micah Benuelis that they got from USC that played against Notre Dame. So I think on paper, from how we've evaluated, there's a lot to like about this portal class, Trev. But that's what's going to determine if they're good this year. Ryan Brown stepping up. I'd love to see Joey Tenona kind of have a better second year than now. He's got another year of playing football. I think he actually will have a better year in the starting lineup. But this team is going to be determined by how well they did from an evaluating the portal and then getting this team to play as one.
Yeah, without a doubt. Their defensive line, I echo everything that you said about their portal pickups. I'm very interested to see what one of their defensive ends, Elo Mendoza, does. Because he was at Georgia in 25, but he transferred. I think he was at Army in 2024.
Yeah.
This is more of the level for him more than what Georgia was. So if he can
made
break
a mistake
out
going to Georgia, Trev. He did
100%.
But to your point, Georgia thought enough of him to bring him in from the portal from Army, right, and then didn't play him. Which it's like, dude, whatever. But he's a kid that had 8 tackles for loss and 6.5 sacks at Army in 2024. To your point, if he breaks out, please continue. I know that's where I interrupted you, but the fact that Georgia even went and got a kid from West Point, I think says a lot about what they saw from him on film.
Without a doubt. Their trenches are going to be very interesting to watch this year, especially on defense. Can Breon Ishmael step up? Can Ian Jeffries be the guy that they were hoping? Can Elo Mendoza be what Georgia, to your point, thought of him to bring him down to Athens? Because I think that's going to help out guys like Charles Correa. He's one of the linebackers that followed Barry Odom over from UNLV and allow him to have a better season. So a lot of their defensive success will be determinant on a lot of these portal guys working out. But I'm with you. I'm staying consistent in that if I have questions about SMU's defensive line because it was completely made up of portal guys, it would be very hard for me to be like, yeah, Purdue's going to be fine because they brought in a bunch of portal guys at every single level. Right. A lot of questions there. And to your point, I hesitate to even call this year 2 of Barry Odom. It feels like year 1.5,
sure.
Just a mulligan from what he did last year. But what he has now is a sample size of returning players, to your point about guys like Ryan Brown and Joey Tenona. I like the Jarrett Gibson pickup and the Fame Ijaboy kid that came over. I believe, where was he at?
Iowa State.
Iowa State. Okay. He was okay.
I'm pretty sure I'll look that up while you're talking, but yeah, I'm pretty sure he was from Iowa State, but I'm gonna go look.
Okay. Cool. Sounds good. They have enough of a supporting cast returning.
Yeah, between guys like was from Iowa State. You were correct. Is this kid from Wisconsin? I'll find it. You keep going. I will pull it up, but you keep going. But you're on a roll. You're cruising.
They have enough returning guys here between Joey Tenona, Ethan Trent at right guard, Ryan Brown
Minnesota.
at quarterback. Minnesota.
I knew it was
Okay.
one of those. I knew it was one of those. Yeah.
I knew it was one of the upper Midwest teams. I was like, I
Minnesota.
appreciate that. Cool. But when you have guys come back like CJ Madden, Breon Ishmael, Ian Jeffries, Charles Correa, Ryan Turner, and then Hudari Hines at corner, you have enough of a foundation to try to build off of whatever culture that you had from last season. That's where it comes into play. I wish they would have had a stronger finish to the 2025 season.
Yeah.
Because in a different situation, like if they finished the season off slightly stronger, not if they would have upset Indiana or if they would have held them to 10 points, but if they just wouldn't have lost by 53 points and put up more of a fight down the stretch, you would have had more of that argument of, hey, they have a strong culture base. They've made some portal additions. Very interested to see what they do this year, but they do still have strengths coming into the season. I don't want to paint this picture that all hope is lost and they'll just be a 2-10 team again. They do have strengths going into this season.
It is a little weird to see how much of a focus they've put on recruiting Georgia kids. Like not Georgia kids, like high school Georgia kids, but I mean literally recruiting Georgia transfers.
Yeah.
CJ Madden's projected to start for them. He transferred last year from Georgia. They got Denylon Morissette is from Georgia. They got Eli Mendoza was at Georgia last year. Luke Rabs, a snapper from Georgia. Marquise Easley from Georgia. And then there was a receiver, I think CJ Smith, that they had last year. There was a couple of Georgia guys that they had last year that ended up, I think, bouncing. So that has been kind of interesting. Like, Nitro Tuggle was from Georgia. They got him from Georgia. Let me see here real quick. Who's the other guy? Michael Jackson that you mentioned earlier. He was from Georgia, and there was one other receiver from Georgia that they had last year. I was pretty sure a speedy kid, but I can't find that one. But yeah, it's interesting. Like it's like, hey, we'll take Kirby Smart's leftovers and see how that works out. Like hasn't worked out so far because the one guy that did play well bounced and went back into the portal. So yeah, it's not been great. Not been great so far.
No, it hasn't. But sticking along the theme of wide receivers and kind of just skill overall on offense, one of their strengths is that they have good skill on offense. Talked about Xavier Townsend, Asid Wasim. So interested to see what they do. I like their running back pickups. They have Antonio Harris comes back, who ended up taking over for the kid's name is escaping me. Devin Mockabee.
Yeah.
But then they picked up Jarrett Gibson, who I think came over from Texas, and famous Ija Boy, who came over from Minnesota. So I like their running back room.
They've got a chance to have good skill on offense. Like, and again, when we're talking good skill, we're just talking about their season. We're not talking about, oh gosh, I'm worried about Notre Dame stopping Purdue's offense. That's not what we're talking about. We're just saying this is just talking about Purdue, not necessarily how Purdue stacks up against Notre Dame. We'll talk about that at the very end when we make our prediction for this game. But we talked about the receivers. I think those kids can have some success. They can line up against Minnesota and say, hey, we can do some things in this matchup. They've got running backs that can go against those teams. The guard they got from USC is a good football player. I'm hoping that Joey Tenona can get back to form because we like Joey Tenona a lot, Trev, coming out of high school. Or at least I did. You weren't with me at the time, but I did. And then, of course, he had that car accident, and just trying to have a normal life, much less play football. I was so happy to see him get a chance to play football. I'd love to see him finish his career on a high note. But, you're going to have 3 new starters in the offensive line from the portal, so that's going to be a question mark. But, like, from a skill standpoint, I think there's and I'll say this. I think the guys they got in the portal this year are going to be a little bit better culture fits than the kids they got last year. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. Getting the kid from Penn is going to do a little bit more for your locker room than what Nitro Tuggle did for your locker room. You know what I'm saying? And so I do like that. Are they going to be dynamic? No, but I think they've got a nice mix to kind of run, sort of the spread offense they want to run. But the key at the end of the day, Trev, is they're going to need their offensive line to be as good as maybe you and I think it can be, with Joey Tenona getting better, with the pickups they got in the portal. Actually, I was going to start talking about quarterback. Let's wait for that. We'll do that at the end. But the other thing that I like is I do think the portal has helped improve their secondary. I would say that position more than any other is where they had the biggest talent improvement through the portal. As I mentioned, I really like Jaden Mangum. I think he's a very good football player. Mr. Clark, it's literally his name. I'm not being respectful, Mr. Clark, but his name is literally Mr. Clark. Came over after a very good season last year from Florida International, 63 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, had 3 interceptions last year, 13 passes defensed last year at FIU. Jaden Mangum comes over from Michigan State. He's a kid. He's a good football player. He didn't have a great year last year, but 2 years ago at Michigan State, or 3 years ago, actually, 53 tackles. This kid that's dealt with some injuries. He's got to be healthy. I think he's a good player. I really do. I like Jaden Mangum. He's a big, tall, long kid. And then, of course, they got John Slaughter out of the portal, who was he Colorado? He's been at Colorado. He's been all over. I believe he's from Colorado. I think he came from Colorado. Let me look real quick and find that. He was at Colorado last year, yes. So he was at Tennessee for 2 years, and then he was at Colorado. Had 25 tackles last year. So I think from a talent standpoint, they're going to have a pretty long secondary. Multiple 6'2" guys in the secondary. Can they play? That's going to be the question. But I think that's an area where there's a potential to be much improved is in the secondary.
Agreed. And they're one of the few teams on Notre Dame's schedule that returned both of their starting corners from last year in Ryan Turner and Hudari Hines. So
Ryan Turner's a good football player.
He is, man. I mean, they also fit that bill of what you're talking about. Long secondary, taller. I think both of their corners go like 6 foot and 6'1". So length will definitely be a topic of discussion for the week.
And the two safeties I just talked about are 6'2". Mangum and Slaughter, both 6'2" guys. To your point that you were just talking about with your corners, Trev, Ryan Turner is a little over 6 foot. He transferred from Ohio State. And then Hudari Hines is 6'1", 200 pounds. He's a good-sized kid. He's an Indianapolis kid. So I think they're going to be more athletic in the secondary this year. They're going to be longer in the secondary this year. And I just think there's just better overall football talent in the secondary this year than there was last year. I think he erred on the side of, look, let's go get some athletes last year. And some of those guys just weren't good football players. And I think they're going to be better football players this year.
Agreed. Some of the bigger concerns that we have about Purdue this year, one of them we've already talked about. They're such a portal-heavy team. There have been examples of teams so far, and especially in this new era of college football, that have shown the ability to rebuild through the portal. Mm-hmm. But Purdue is still very much in the infancy stages of rebuilding under Barry Odom. And like what we said at the start of the show, they're kind of just rinse repeating and then hoping that this season has a different outcome. Now, there's reasons to feel a little bit better about it. You have more culture fits here. I think their player eval was a little bit better this season for what they want to do versus what it was last year.
They didn't focus as much on just pure athleticism, and they said, hey, let's go get some football players. Yeah. I think that's probably smart.
Yeah.
This isn't track. This is a football game. Yes.
Agreed completely. But their portal pickups are a big concern. And then honestly, the bigger concern overall is the guy driving the ship. Can Barry Odom get this team going? They did not show. The biggest concern for me from coming out of last season, and I've already talked about, is they showed no signs of life at the end of the season. Once they had X amount of games under their belt and they were familiar with what. Now, losing some of the guys that you did to the portal into graduation, is that addition by subtraction, or was that just kind of a preview of things to come for Barry Odom teams at Purdue? I don't know the answer to that because I really like Barry Odom as a head coach. So I'm still willing to err on the side of let's wait and see what this season brings. But it is a concern. Can he get this team going?
That's going to determine their season. I'm not quite as high on Barry Odom as you are. Is he capable of having Purdue be better than 1-11, 2-10? Absolutely. I think our debate would be more, what's the ceiling under Barry Odom? Neither of us think that 2-10 is going to be the norm under Barry Odom. Like, they have to go through the portal. They have to right now, and until they can establish. I will say this though: they have landed a couple. If they can hang on to them. That's going to be the key. You got to hang on to them. They've actually gotten a couple pretty good high school pickups, Trev. They got a kid, Trenton Yancey, who visited Notre Dame. They got him to commit in the 27 class. Now, again, will he stick? I have no idea. That I would not feel great about that. But he's a good football player if they can get him to stick. They got a commitment from TK Cunningham, who's a pretty good defensive lineman from the state of Arizona. They got an offensive lineman from Cincinnati, Patrick O'Brien, 6'6", 290, kid that visited Notre Dame in the spring and was in if we miss out on this guy and this guy, we may turn to him kind of mold for Notre Dame, but I think is a really good pickup for Purdue. So that they've actually they're actually doing pretty well so far in the recruiting class in 2027. So they've got 16 commitments. So I think Barry Odom wants to do more in high school recruiting. He understands that that's where we can't just reload. But for now, the roster was so bad at Purdue that he's been forced to kind of do this through the portal, and then hopefully you can establish something with high school recruiting. But I think he's done a good job there. Here's the other thing I like too is he's got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me see here. Let me try this again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 kids from Illinois, Indiana, or Ohio. And of that 16, that's huge. You've got to get the best kids from Ohio and Indiana and Illinois that aren't going to Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, places like that. You're going to have to. And then sneak an underrated kid like Trenton Yancey if you can keep him in the class. Find some of those guys. But you should – any kid that Ohio State or Notre Dame don't want in the Cincinnati Catholic League, you got to try to get, man. Any of the kids from Indianapolis that don't go to Ohio State, Michigan, or Notre Dame, you need to fight hard to get, or Indiana now. You need to fight hard to get, and that's what they're doing so far in this 27 class. And I think that bodes well for the future. It's just how patient is the institution going to be, and will they give him the resources to be successful on the recruiting trail outside of the portal? Those are going to be keys for him.
Let's bring home our preview of Purdue and talk about twofold here, how we think their season is going to go, and then talk about how we think their matchup with Notre Dame is going to go. So first, let's talk about the season. We've went through their schedule. We've talked about some of their strengths, some of their concerns. How do you see their season playing out, Brian?
Trev, when I look at the Indiana schedule, it really comes down to you've got to be better at home. That's going to be the key. You've got to be a team that you're going to get whooped at home by Notre Dame. You're going to get whooped on the road by Indiana. It's okay. Don't build your whole season around, let's go beat Notre Dame. You've got to be good at home. You can't lose games at home like they've lost at home in the last couple of years to teams that honestly are just teams. If you're going to rebuild, you've got to do well. You've got to be able to beat Illinois at home. You can't lose. This is the worst one. You can't lose to Rutgers at home. Last year, they were screwed. Their home slate was USC, Illinois, Rutgers, Ohio State, and Indiana. Like, you weren't going to win a couple of those. 3 of those you had no chance to win last year. I don't know that that's the case this year, Trev. Your home slate this year is Indiana State, Wake Forest, Minnesota, Washington, Maryland, and Wisconsin, and then Notre Dame. Outside of Notre Dame, you should be competitive to some degree in those 6 games. Can you steal 3 or 4 of those? That's going to be the key to their season. It's going to be tough to get road wins this year, Trev. You're at Indiana, at Iowa, at Penn State, at Illinois, at UCLA. Maybe they steal 1. Maybe. But that's what I say is you've got a much more manageable home slate than you did last year, where last year you had Indiana, Ohio State, Illinois, and USC at home. And last year, Illinois was much better than you. The year before, you had Notre Dame, Nebraska, Oregon, and Penn State at home. They haven't had manageable home slates for the most part in the last 2 years. This one outside of Notre Dame is much more manageable, and they've got 7 home games this year, Trev. That's another thing when you look at their schedule. They only have 5 road games this year because this is one of those years where, they've got 5. They're 4-5 in their conference slate. So they got their 3 non-conference are all at home. One of Notre Dame, you've got to me, their season is going to hinge on what they do in week 2. Can they upset Wake Forest in week 2? That's going to be a key, because if you do that, then you've got a shot to go into the Minnesota home game no worse than 2-3, because you'll beat Indiana State, you'll beat Wake Forest. Then maybe you can pull off an upset out at UCLA or at Illinois. Unlikely, but then you have that 3-game losing streak. Now you got back-to-back home games against Minnesota and Washington. Can you split those? Then you've got home games against Maryland and Wisconsin at home in November. Can you split those? To me, that's the key. That's why I think that Wake Forest game is going to be huge. If you can win that game, now you just got to split Minnesota and Washington at home, split Maryland and Wisconsin at home in November, and now all of a sudden you've doubled your win total. Now, if you can have one of those home slates where you can win 2 of them and still split, now you're a 5-7 team. Now you're like, hey, guys, look what we're doing in year 2. I think that's possible for them this year. I think 4 to 5 wins is certainly possible for Purdue. That's a good season in year 2 under Barry Odom. Anything more than that, dude should be honestly in consideration for Big Ten Coach of the Year. I'm dead serious. If they win 6 or more games, he should be in conversation for Big Ten Coach of the Year. But I think a more reasonable slate is 4 to 5 wins is where you're. If you're just at 3, that means you got beat at home by a lot of teams that Purdue should just not be that far behind. You should not be that far behind Wisconsin, Maryland, Washington, Minnesota, Wake Forest, and Indiana State. Like that should be 4+ wins right there just on your home slate. And if you can't do that, then it doesn't bode well for the future of Barry Odom's tenure.
I'm with you completely. My thoughts about Purdue's season is along the same lines. As of right now, if I had to put a number behind it, I'm going 3-9, but they need to show signs of life. Right now, in the last 2 seasons, they're 0-18 in the Big Ten.
Yeah. And not a lot of close games.
No. I mean, that's the thing. When I mean signs of life, you can't lose 19-0 against Northwestern in a game where you score 0 points.
Yeah.
You got to show signs of life. You're going to lose to Indiana this year when you play them on the road. You just can't lose by 53 points.
Or 66 like the year before.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm with you. They
and if you lose to Notre Dame, which you will, make it look like last year's game again.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 100%. I thought that was going to be the catalyst to what their season was going to be. It's like, hey, guys, this was a better team. They're destined to, at the time, thought that this team had a really good shot at making the playoffs, but we just hung 23 on them in the first half of the game on their home field. Mm-hmm. Let's turn this into something. And instead, what that turned into was you gave up 43 points to Illinois the following week or the following game. Mm-hmm. You lose to Minnesota, and you just go on this just disastrous losing streak. You can't lose to Rutgers at home. It's just you got to see signs of life from Purdue this year. But I'm with you. One of the benefits of their schedule is of the new Big Ten teams on the West Coast. They only have to go to one of them. It's UCLA. They get Washington at home.
Yeah, if you're going to get one of those teams this year, that's the one you want to get, right?
Yes.
Because you don't want to get UCLA next year on the road.
No, agreed completely. So it'll be tough sledding for them, but right now I have them at 3-9, but hopefully showing some signs of life, because if not, I could be very quick.
Dig it. Let's do our final prediction here, Trev, as we wrap up the opponent preview. Let's make our prediction, Notre Dame and Purdue. Let's do it.
Yeah, I have Notre Dame winning this game 56-6. I think Marcus Freeman is going to take out some frustrations about giving up 23 first-half points to Purdue last year on their home turf. I think that is something that will be top of mind for them. The talent gap with this team is vast. And if Notre Dame shows up and plays anywhere remotely close to their A game, this will be another slaughter. In back-to-back seasons, Notre Dame's put up 56 points and 66 points. I see that trend continuing.
D-Rock just stole my prediction, 52-10. That's my prediction. I think that there will be a drive where Notre Dame will normally want to go for a 4th down, that Marcus Freeman's going to let Spencer Dorath kick a field goal against his old school. That's why I went 52. There's going to be that one 4th and 2 at the 23 where Marcus Freeman would normally say, hey, Denbrock, let's go for it, that he's going to let the kid go out there and get a field goal against his old team. So I'll go 50. So I don't want to steal his. I'll go 52-14. They get a late garbage touchdown like they did in 2020, like they did each of the last 2 years. They got a late garbage touchdown in both games. They'll get another one this game. It'll be 52-14. Notre Dame wins. And I think that's me giving Purdue the benefit of, I think they're going to be better this year. If they're not better this year, it'll look just like it did 2 years ago.
We're rolling here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Up next here, Brian, we have a really, really fun conversation. There's been a lot of talk this offseason and really what's felt like the last decade about who's the better conference, the SEC or the Big Ten. And we thought, you know what? We've been bystanders in this conversation for a little bit too long, and now it's time to input our opinions and who we believe that better conference is, what makes for a better conference. We're going to dive into the arguments on each side and kind of some of the ironic arguments on each side, because that narrative has changed for each conference as time has started to unfold, especially here recently in the 12-team college football playoff. But Up next here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, we'll be talking about the Big Ten versus the SEC and weighing in on who we believe is better.
It's been a fascinating debate because you have two conferences with two conferences commissioners who are obsessed with people's perception of them. And it's been fascinating because the SEC has been the big dog for forever. And there were a lot of years where the SECs, we're the best team, we're the best conference, we're the best conference. I'm like, no, you're not. You just have the best maybe team in the country, but your conference isn't great, especially the SEC East. This is one thing we talked about. One thing that helped Georgia's climb go fast is because the SEC East kind of sucked. And Georgia was getting some pretty easy regular season schedules. And for whatever reason, the SEC just refuses to let Georgia and Alabama play with any kind of consistency in the regular season. That's what's been the last 2 years they've played. And guess what's happened each of the last 2 years in the regular season? Georgia's lost Alabama both times, and so it's been very fascinating to watch this debate because it used to be, Trev, that the SEC was like, we're dominating because, look, we're winning championships. They won a championship in 06. They won one in 07. They won one in 08. They won one in 9. They won one in 10, 11, 12, 15, 17, 19, and 20. 21 and 22, and they were, just dominating sport as far as like the championship. And what was this? Well, we're the best. Look who wins championships. Now that the Big Ten's winning championships, now 3 in a row, who cares about championships? Look how deep we are. The irony of that is that's what the Big Ten used to say. You may have the best team, but look at how good we are. This is back when Wisconsin was good and Penn State was good, and you had all these really good teams, but there was no great team in the Big Ten. You think of like the 2000 era. From 2000 to 2009, the Big Ten didn't really have teams that were competitive on a national championship standpoint. And, Ohio State was you had that 02 team that won a championship, and their 05 and 06 teams are really good, but they just couldn't get to the title game. And why? Because Penn State would beat them one year. Michigan would beat them one year because it was a really top-heavy league, but no like elite team, and the depth was good. You'd get knocked off by Wisconsin. You'd get knocked off by Minnesota. Michigan State had some great years. And the Big Ten would say, yeah, you may have the best team, but look at our depth. Look how many good teams we have. We have a different team playing for the title or a different team in the playoff every year. Now it's hilarious watching these two teams completely switch positions. Hilarious. Yeah. Because now all the Big Ten wants to say is, who cares if everyone other than our top 3 teams suck? We have the champ. We've had, 2 teams in the semifinals each of the last 2 years. It's not just, but this is the thing for the Big Ten. It's not just that we have the best team. They've had 2 teams in the semifinals each of the last 2 years, correct?
Yep.
So last year it was, no, it was not Minnesota. Yes, and I keep forgetting Oregon's a Big Ten team. Then the year before it was Ohio State and Penn State. And the year before that, it's 2 Big Ten teams that are currently in the Big Ten, even though they weren't in the Big Ten at the time. You had Michigan and Washington, who are now both Big Ten teams. So last 3 years, there have been 6 semifinalists, and they're all in the Big Ten right now. It's not number of teams. That's just the number of times a Big Ten team has been a semifinalist is the point that I'm making there. But I actually think it has been 6 different semifinalists, right? Michigan, Washington, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana, Oregon. It's been 6 different teams have made the college football semifinals that are currently in the Big Ten. The SEC has had 1, 2, 3 teams make the semifinals, right? Texas and Alabama in 23. Texas did it again in 24. And then this past year, you had Ole Miss.
Yeah.
So you've doubled them up on semifinal appearances. The SEC has not had a team make the championship game since 22 when Georgia won it. Am I correct?
Correct.
So now you hear SEC say, yeah, we don't care about that. Look how deep we are. Look how many good teams we have, which I think, first of all, has been BS in the past. Having said that, in 2026, that is going to be a much, much, much more valid point of contention. In the last 2 years, it's been pure spin. The SEC has not been that deep. This year in 26, I do think this is going to be not only the deepest league in college football, I don't think it's going to be close. I think the SEC is going to be very deep this season. And that's when you kind of get into this. Okay, I still think the Big Ten has more legit title contenders, but I think the SEC's whole deep thing is going to carry more weight. And that's what's going to make this fascinating. But I love the irony of the Big Ten now saying championships are all that matter, and the SEC saying, no, it's depth that matters, when this is exact opposite that they had been arguing for 20 years. I just find that so fun to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, you had the Big Ten saying, all right, well, the SEC wouldn't be as dominant if they had to come play in our league. If you had to go out and play up at Wisconsin, if you had to go play in the Horseshoe, if you had to play in the Big House, if you had to go play up in East Lansing. Now you have the SEC talk about, well, Ohio State and Indiana and Oregon and all those teams wouldn't be winning championships and playing for semifinals if they had to come play down here in Tuscaloosa. If they had to go play out in Austin, Texas, or if they had to play in Gainesville, or if they had to play in Athens, so I think it's fascinating. I'm with you. It is hilarious. The literal 180
it's great
of difference that they've had to go through.
It's great, which is just, look, it's all spin. And it's all spin because there's valid arguments to make about, yeah, but you're winning the championships. That's a valid argument to make, just like depth is a valid argument to make. I don't actually have a problem with either team making the arguments they're making. The issue I have is how the other conference, I should say, it says team, used to poo-poo that argument when it was not on their side. There's been years where the SEC had both. There were a lot of years where the Big Ten had both. This is one of, this is one of those years where I think that argument to some degree holds water in both leagues, but more so in one compare. I think there's more title contenders in the Big Ten. I think there's more depth in the SEC, but I think there are Big Ten depth, but there also are SEC title contenders. It's going to be fascinating. And that's why I think the debate of who's been better the last 3 years, to me, is not a debate. It's the Big Ten. Would you agree with that, Trev? The Big Ten has certainly been better than the SEC the last 2 years. The debate that we're going to have is we're going to state our case for 26 because we're projecting what will be better in 26. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our case for the Big Ten, then we're going to make our case for the SEC, and then give our opinion because Trev, before I move on, would you like to make a case that I'm wrong on that the Big Ten has been the better conference in any metric you want to use the last 2 years, whether it's depth or championships, like better, more teams at the top? Would you like to make that case before we move on?
No, because I've always been somebody that has been like championships are king. I mean, you can talk about how you have a deep league, but if I'm comparing somebody that has a conference loaded with teams that are 7-5 and 8-4, and maybe 1 or 2 title contenders at the top versus a team that has now consistently put a conference that has put 6 different teams in the semifinals, that's more of the overarching goal. So no, I'm with you. I think the Big Ten over the last 2-3 seasons, especially last 2 seasons, has been the better conference.
Now, has it been as better as they're making out to be? Like they're just so much better and it's not even close. And no, it's not. But I do think that there has been the emergence, and I think the emergence of Indiana is the reason why I'm willing to say that, because it hasn't just been Ohio State and Penn State and Oregon, or Ohio State and Oregon this past year. It's been those teams. Michigan had that one good year in 23. Indiana's been a legit playoff team the last 2 years. You do have Oregon in the playoffs the last 2 years. They've had the number 1 seed each of the last 2 years, and one of them won it all. The other one got beat in the quarters by another team in that conference. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's the other thing too, is they've kind of beat each other up a little bit at times also, Trev. So it's going to be interesting to have this conversation, but I do think it's the Big Ten has been the better conference the last 2, arguably 3 years. I think the SEC had a little bit better beef in 23 than they did in 24 and 25.
Sure.
Because you had that Georgia was pretty good that year, and obviously you had Alabama. There were some, looking at teams that were in the league at the time. What we're talking about now is teams that are in the league now. So let's have this conversation, Trev. Who is the better league? Let's state our case for the Big Ten. What is the arguments that the Big Ten has for being the best league? And I think there are several. I think the first one, Trev, is the fact that they've not only made won the last 3 national titles. Their league is, as I said, filled with 6 teams that have been in the semifinals or championship game the last 3 years. That's a great case to start. That's a great argument to start making your case for why you're the best league. Hey, we win the championships, and we've had multiple teams playing for a championship.
Yeah, that's the strongest argument backing their point to being the top conference. What's the goal of any college football season? It's to compete for national titles. So over the last 2 seasons, as much as the SEC has wanted to, and this isn't a claim of like every team should be in playoff or bust, but as far as conferences are concerned, the ultimate goal is to make the playoffs, make a run in the playoffs, and put yourself in a position to win a national title. And the Big Ten has done that in its entirety. I mean, you go and you talk about how the SEC champs have yet to pick up a playoff win in the 2014 era, the winners of the conference. Whereas now you have a team in Indiana who went out, they won the Big Ten, they go undefeated, and they win the national title, and did so by decimating blue blood in the SEC in Alabama in the Rose Bowl. And then you also have multiple teams playing for the semifinals, and it's so that's the strongest argument. As much as the SEC wants to pound their fist on the table, it's like, but look at how many 8-4, 9-3 teams that we have. It's like, yeah, I get that, but the goal of any conference isn't to have as many people or as many teams bowl eligible to play for the Duke's Mayo Bowl and the Pop-Tarts Bowl and the Idaho Potato Bowl. It's to put teams in the playoffs and go on a run, and the Big Ten's done that.
What's also funny is, well, we had more teams in the playoffs last year. Yeah, that's not the one you think it is. That means you had even better odds to win it all, and you couldn't even get a team to the championship game. Yeah. And you had no business having 5 in last year. So that argument's not going to hold water for me. I've seen people make it. I think there's another argument to make for the Big Ten, Trev, and I think that there's still, now the SEC's on the upswing. We'll talk about that. But right now, I think there's no doubt that the SEC has better coaching. I mean, the Big Ten has better coaching. When you look at Curt Cignetti, Ryan Day, the job Dan Lanning has done, Kyle Whittingham just joined the league. Kirk Ferentz is as steady as you're going to get in college football. You look at Brett Bielema, who's had success as a college football coach over the years. I mean, there's some really good football. Pat Fitzgerald comes back. Getting him back in the league. Greg Schiano's a solid football coach. You look at the coaching. Jed Fish has done a solid job. Where's he going? PJ Fleck. There's just better coaching, and that doesn't include Lincoln Riley, who has more playoff appearances than anybody that we just mentioned, whose name isn't Ryan Day. Now, he hasn't done it at the school he's at now, but so when I look at it, I think that's another argument that the Big Ten has, and I think it's a big reason why the Big Ten has been better, is because the coaching has been way better. If the SEC had anybody that could do what some of the Indiana's coaching staff did this year from a development standpoint and a scheme standpoint, they wouldn't have been 0-for-3 the last 3 years as far as title game appearances.
Sure.
So I think that's a big part of it as well. I think the Big Ten is better coaching. I have one more thing that I'm going to get before moving on the SEC, but I think that's another aspect is I just think the coaching is better from a head coaching standpoint, but also even getting the coordinators. Some of the better young coordinators in the game were in the Big Ten up until this year. Now, some of them are now head coaches, one of them being in the SEC and Will Stein, but you think Brian Haynes and, some of the up and coming coaches that Big Ten has also, I think I think coaching is just better than the Big Ten right now.
Yeah, I think so too. They just don't have as volatile of a league of coaches. I mean, you compare it to the SEC, you have coaches in that league like Shane Beamer, who it's like, dude, you have all the talent in the world. You've shown that you can construct a talented roster. 1 week you look like world beaters, and the next week you're falling apart. You have coaches like, Steve Sarkisian, who for all of the resources that you have at Texas, you can't put together a stout team in the trenches. Whereas in the Big Ten, you have very consistent coaches. I know what a Dan Lanning-led team is going to look like. I know what a Ryan Day-led team is going to look like. Same thing with Kirk Ferentz. Same thing with Jed Fish. I mean, honestly, good or bad, same thing about Lincoln Riley out west at USC. I have the same feelings now about Curt Cignetti, and I know what type of team that he's going to put out onto the field now at Indiana. So that is a big, big plus for the Big Ten. I agree with you.
Last one for the Big Ten for me is I think this gets overstated sometimes, but it is valid. I just think it gets overplayed a little bit. The fact that paying players is now something everyone does, and now handing a kid 50 grand or giving an uncle 15 grand or 10 grand or 20 grand to influence a kid, or paying off a kid's high school football coach with 15 grand and free perks to your school and all this other kind of stuff that the SEC did for years. Now that that's kind of legal, and you're seeing like, dude, now we're seeing these research institutions in the North that have way more money flowing into their programs. Michigan is a significantly more prosperous school than anyone in the SEC not named Vanderbilt. Ohio State is a significantly more financially prosperous institution than anybody in the SEC. You're seeing these things now come to be. Nebraska's got money flowing into the program. Now that schools that, and a lot of those programs were not really fans of buying high school players. They do things for the kids on their team, but they weren't doing as much. I'm not sitting there pretending that the Big Ten had nobody that paid players. I'm just saying it was a different animal down south, because it's easier to pay a kid down south when you're down south. It's harder for Ohio State. Even if you wanted to do it, it's harder for Ohio State or Penn State or Michigan to go buy a kid down south in an illegal manner, because you've got a network hundreds of miles away, as opposed to finding that local guy that's always at your clinic every year, your coach's clinic every year. That can't be disputed as a legitimate reason why the Big Ten has been able to consider itself the best conference, because the talent gap in the SEC is no longer there, in my opinion, to the degree at least that it was. We'll talk about something in the SEC in a second, but I think that's a part of it as well. As the NIL era has changed the game. The portal era has changed the game, where teams just can't load their rosters up like they used to.
Yeah, agreed. The overarching system has evened the playing field to where there's not as much of a disparaging talent gap. I agree with that completely. Whereas in years past, it was Ohio State got the top level talent, and then kind of behind them was Penn State. And then every once in a while, when Michigan would have that really good, fundamentally sound, hard-nosed football team where you just had guys
on the sideline getting on the plays from the other team.
Yeah. Then you would have guys putting on fake mustaches and going to Central Michigan and getting the plays and hacking into school systems. They would put out a good team as well.
Right. Sorry, I had to. I had to do it, man.
Have to, bro.
Had to do it. You're spot on. Now, hey, that's our case for the Big Ten. Now let's put our SEC hats on, Trev. Let's make our case for the SEC. And I think the biggest case that you hear the SEC make is, look at the NFL draft. We still have the most talent. And when you looked at the NFL draft, there was a lot of talk after day one of, this is why the SEC isn't dominant anymore. There was a lot more Big Ten guys taken in the first round than there were SEC guys. I'm actually going to go look at the numbers here real quick. But I remember that talking point after the end of round one, where you look and you say, hey, man, look at all these teams being drafted. You look at the number 1, the number 4, the number 5, the number 7 picks were all from the Big Ten. Number 11 was from the Big Ten. 14, 16 was Big Ten. 20 was Big Ten. 25 Big Ten. 30 Big Ten. So you had five picks from the Big Ten. For actually, no, 9, 10. I mean, 10 first round picks from the Big Ten. I did this twice. I was like, wait a minute, Ohio State had that. And then, of course, you had like Notre Dame had 2 first round picks. And then you had some Big 12 and ACC picks. And then the SEC that had 1 player taken in the first round, or first 10. And that was Monsieur Delaney, who was 1 year in the SEC. Then you had 2 Bama kids taken 12 and 13. You had 18, 19 from the SEC, and then 24 and 31. So you had 7 from the SEC. You had 10 from the Big Ten, and then you had 2 more from Notre Dame. So a lot more of a northern influence in this draft. Then you got into the kind of the beginning of day 2, and you've got a Penn State kid go early, Michigan go early. Then you started to see more SEC picks, and they ended up having more players taken overall than anybody else. And that's the argument they're going to make. Hey, listen, we know that some of these teams had some top-heavy teams recently, but we still have the most talent, and we have 2 fewer teams than the Big Ten and still had more people taken. The argument the SEC makes is that they still have more talent than the other leagues. If you want to put depth of talent, I think that's an argument that they can make. I don't know that they dominate the top of the All-American talent list like they used to, for the reasons we mentioned, but I still think there's more NFL players scattered throughout the SEC than there is in the Big Ten, in my opinion.
Unfortunately for the SEC, the talent conversation is a double-edged sword because on one hand, I do buy into the argument that the depth of talent that they have, not top-level talent, is superior to the other three Power Four leagues, including the Big Ten. Here's the flip side of that coin. We just got done talking about the level of coaching in the Big Ten. The downside for that for the SEC is you could sit here and talk about all the talent in the world that you want to, that Georgia, Texas, and Ole Miss, and LSU, and Alabama, and all those teams have. Why haven't you had a team play for the national title in 3 years then with that level of talent? But as far as the argument for the SEC, yes, their depth of talent, I think, it's more diverse across the league as well, kind of bleeding into the second conversation of just the SEC conference as a whole is more deep than the Big Ten because there are more talented teams in the SEC than there are the SEC. There's more talented teams in the SEC than there are the Big Ten. Sorry, throwing around a lot of conferences there. But I think that's one of the reasons why you see, like, there are matchups that are significantly closer in the SEC on a week-to-week basis. Like Missouri playing Alabama is closer than Ohio State going to play USC, for example, a matchup that we're going to see this season. And those are two kind of comparable level of talent when you compare the conferences. But yeah, a big picture, I do think the SEC has more depth of talent than the Big Ten.
Our guy Daily Comments put this in the thread. This sounds about right from what I remember talking, that the SEC had 19 more players taken in the entire draft than the Big Ten, who was second in with that. When you consider that there's two fewer teams, I think that does make a statement. I'm going to stick to pro SEC now, Trev, but the coaching part is a big part of that. Why the Big Ten has been able to maximize the talent they have. Let's talk about the second point that I think is in favor of the SEC and why they're the best conferences. Part of the reason that we don't have teams playing for championships is because we beat each other up throughout the regular season. Now, I don't want to refute that point right now, Trev. I want to make that point, and then we can refute it later because right now we have our pro SEC hats on right now. And I think there's some validity to this. You could argue that the Big Ten's top three teams are better than the SEC's top three teams. Top three teams in the Big Ten, no-brainers, Indiana, Ohio State, Oregon.
Yep.
No question. That's two of your last three national champions. The only two teams that I think right now in the big SEC are legitimate, no doubt about it, title contenders, in my opinion, is Texas and Georgia. I would argue that the Big Ten is more top-heavy in that regard. When I get past the top three, there's only two teams in the Big Ten that I even think remotely have an argument to be a title team, and I think those are very thin arguments, and that's USC and Michigan. Would you want to pound the table for anybody else in the Big Ten being a championship contender? Not Big Ten, national championship contender, besides that group that I just mentioned?
No.
Whereas in the SEC, I could see Bama jumping into the mix, A&M jumping in the mix, LSU jumping in the mix, Oklahoma jumping in the mix. Ole Miss, I'm less likely to put into that conversation. But when you look at that doesn't even get into, what the direction Florida's going, the direction that Tennessee is going, potentially Auburn is going. The argument that I would make if I'm in the SEC, and some of them are making it, is it's from a depth standpoint, we have way better teams top to bottom, and there's more teams in the SEC that are capable of becoming champions than in the Big Ten. I would argue that just as an institution, if these teams were ran correctly and had the right coaches, I would add 3 Big Ten teams as title contenders along with the 3 that are there: Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon. I would add USC, I would add Michigan, and I would add Washington. That's it. Like, not in their current forms, but like if they have the right coaching, those programs are capable of becoming national championship contending teams. I don't think Iowa's ever going to be that. I don't think Wisconsin's ever going to be that. I don't think Michigan State's ever going to be that. I don't know. Maybe UCLA, but when was the last time UCLA was a national title contending team? I was young. I don't think you were even born yet. It might have been around when you were born. They had a couple teams in the 90s that maybe could have been there. Whereas the SEC, you not only do you have Georgia, Texas, Bama, A&M, LSU, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, you've got Florida, you've got Auburn, you've got Tennessee. These are all programs that have the capability of becoming champions. And I'm not even going to like Arkansas and South Carolina. Those teams to me are like Iowa. Yeah, you may think you can do that, but you've never actually done it, so I don't want to hear it. Like you haven't been that team, so maybe you can, but do it once, and then we can have a conversation where all those SEC teams that I just mentioned are teams that have been there. USC, Michigan, and Washington have all been there in the last 20 years, where Washington and Michigan literally played each other for the national title 3 years ago. So that's another argument. I do think it's a valid argument. I think the other part of that argument is the Big Ten, like say, hey, our top 3 teams would beat your top 3 teams. And that's true in a lot of instances. The counter argument to me is our bottom 6 would curb stomp your bottom 6. I think that's actually also a valid argument. And that gets into a statistic that I saw somebody make on Twitter today. I've not fact checked this, but it sounds right. This statistic I saw today, it's a lame SEC attempt to argue how great they are, but this is the point he made. Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, in the last 2 years, the rest of the Big Ten is a combined 1-48 against those teams. In the SEC, if you take the top 3 teams, Georgia, Texas, and Ole Miss, the last 2 years, the rest of the SEC is combined 6-37 against them. That somehow makes the point that there's more depth. I don't think it makes that point. I think it means your top teams aren't as good as the top 3 teams in the Big Ten. I think that's part of the argument. Having said that, if you had someone who wasn't such a blind homer and actually knew how to make a good argument, you could absolutely point out that name me a team like Florida in the Big Ten. And what I mean by that is Florida has been mediocre to bad the last 2 years, yet they've gone out and beat some of the top teams in the SEC because their talent is such that even when they're bad, they can put it all together and beat you. Minnesota could play the game of their life, and they are not touching Ohio State, Oregon, or Indiana right now. Where Florida, and I don't think that's just because those teams happen to be way better than Georgia and Texas and teams like that. I think it's because the NFL talent and the depth of talent on those rosters is such that their coaching is not good, but if they put it all together for that 1 week, you can do that. Heck, go back to 2019 when a 4-8 South Carolina team beat a 12-1 Georgia team. You don't see stuff like that happening in the Big Ten, Trev. The closest we'll get is okay, Oregon almost lost to Wisconsin when they played their worst game. The last time I can remember something like that happening is probably, 2018 with Purdue beating Ohio State? It's the last time I can remember an elite Big Ten team losing to somebody in the Big Ten that wasn't good. That happens relatively frequently in the SEC. Even before this era, that would happen relatively frequently in this era. And I think that speaks to it is a tougher grind week to week in the SEC than it is in the Big Ten, especially if I'm putting my pro SEC hat on. We don't give our best teams cupcake schedules like you tend to do most seasons in the Big Ten. Oregon, Indiana, and Michigan the last few years have played jokes of schedules. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to go ahead and give Ohio State the toughest Big Ten in-conference schedule we've ever seen in this expanded league. But look at then Penn State's schedule. Look at Indiana's schedule the last 2 years. Whereas Texas, Georgia, Bama, LSU, Ole Miss, they're playing tougher in-conference schedules. The SEC is giving their TV partner much better content than what the Big Ten is giving their TV partner. And take this aside for a second. If I'm in NBC, Fox, and CBS, I'm having a come to Jesus conversation with Tony Petitti. Hey, man, I don't know what y'all are doing with these schedules, but y'all are giving us straight garbage. You're lucky that the game is going to make us money every year. But this is garbage, what you're giving us on a weekly basis. Whereas ESPN is giving us great SEC games every week, except for game 11 when it's that BS FCS week. You know what I mean? But otherwise, we talked about it all last year, how bad the Big Ten slate was every year. Our teams in the SEC have to go through a much tougher gauntlet. And I think there's validity to that. Oh, Indiana's much fresher come postseason time. Ohio State's much fresher come postseason time. Michigan was definitely fresher come postseason time. I think that's a valid argument to make. Michigan had to beat Purdue to get to the college football playoffs, where Alabama had to beat Georgia. It's a big difference.
Yeah, agreed. The biggest argument, in my opinion, that goes in the SEC's favor are the teams next in line knocking on the door to win a national title and become championship contenders. That is such a huge argument in their favor. We're not getting yet into whether I'm pro SEC or pro Big Ten yet, but that is a very strong case to make because how I feel and how we feel about I guess next in line in the Big Ten is Michigan and USC is how I feel about Ole Miss. But the difference there is we listed off 4 to 5 other teams before we got to Ole Miss. There's no 4 to 5 other teams.
We just saw Ole Miss go to the semifinals last year. You know what I mean? So with the right this year, we agree. But there's a world in which they get the right coach. Ole Miss can do that.
Yep.
Who's doing that after USC and Michigan?
100%. How I feel about USC and Michigan this year is how I feel about Ole Miss going into this year. The difference is there are 4 to 5 teams that we listed ahead of Ole Miss that are like Texas A&M, Bama, LSU, Oklahoma. Those teams are all significantly closer to knocking on the door. Not to mention, I think another thing going in the SEC's favor this year, as far as that coaching conversation is concerned, I think that there are better coaches in positions in the SEC in pivotal spots. And I'm not just talking about Will Stein at Kentucky. I'm talking about Auburn getting a new coach, John Summerall at Florida. I don't know what the equivalent of that is in the Big Ten. Chip Kelly going to Northwestern. I don't know what the equivalent of that is. Right. Bob Chesney going to UCLA, maybe. That's a potential there. But I'm not willing to say that just now because UCLA has Bob Chesney that they're now going to start replacing teams like Nebraska. And, that's a big argument in favor of the SEC.
The counter to us to the argument is, well, look at Indiana. That's fine. But that's one example. That's an anomaly. And a guy that brought a bunch of – and that says more about the Big Ten than it does necessarily. You know what I mean? Would Indiana have been able to do what they did the last 2 years if they're in the SEC? I think you could make a case that they would not. They're not in the playoffs in 2024 if they're playing an SEC schedule. They're not. Because the SEC does not give their teams easy schedules. A&M was the closest we've seen to an easy schedule this year, and they still couldn't run the table because they still had to play Texas at the end of the year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's –
the tough thing with Indiana is using it as a referencing point because the counter would be fair. I would understand it. But they've played, 3 ranked teams in the last 2 regular seasons? They played Ohio State in 24 and then Oregon and Illinois in 25.
Right.
Indiana did it and they turned it around, but they played a combined 3
That's in October for most SEC teams.
Literally.
You know what I mean? That's 1 October for most SEC teams, yes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what makes it so difficult. FanDuel also thinks the same because when you go and you break down their top 10 teams with the championship odds, there's 3 teams from the Big Ten. No surprise to anybody. It's Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana. The SEC has 4 teams. The other 3 teams are made up of Notre Dame, Miami, and Texas Tech still somehow.
Here's the other argument that I would make for the SEC, and I don't know that they're going to want to make this argument because then you're admitting your coaching sucks. But if the SEC coaching becomes as good as the Big Ten coaching, the SEC dominates the Big Ten in this conversation because they would then have top teams that could match the top Big Ten teams, great back and forth games, but that's when the depth rises. That's when there's literally 6 or 7 SEC teams with a chance to win a title. That's when it changes. So if John Summerall, if Alex Golesh are as good as what those programs hope that their coaches are, if Will Stein can do something at Kentucky, I don't know that they're a title-winning team, but they're going to have a chance to be better because they're going to be able to just take kids from Big Ten territory and bring them down in there. That's where, you look at an Oklahoma, if they get the right coaching staff, it becomes a title contender. LSU with the right coaching staff becomes – they don't even need a great coaching staff. They won a title with flipping Les Miles and Ed Orgeron. They don't even need an elite coach. They just need a borderline competent one. This is why they didn't win the last 3 years because they didn't have one. Texas A&M is a team that I think can do that. I would not have put Ole Miss in that conversation until last year. They got proven to be a team that can do that. And, of course, Bama can. Tennessee can. That's another team that can. Vanderbilt's never going to be a title contender. They're more Iowa if they have the right coach. They're 8-9 wins every year. Occasionally they get those really good 10-win teams like last year, but then they're not going to stay that way. So that's where I look at it too, Trev, is there's a lot more if the coaching ever catches up in the SEC, they will be back to being the best league again. Because good coaches are going to be able to they're not going to cry about, we can't buy players, or they're going to say, well, we still have more talent than they do. Coach them up. Coach up the kids we have. And I think that battles too. So here's the question, Trev. When you look at this discussion, so we're gonna kind of talk about what weighs more, and then we're going to have one caveat about what could sway this debate this year of who's better. To me, I don't believe that just winning championships or even having the 2 or 3 best teams equals you're the best conference. I also don't think just having the deeper league equals you're the best conference. I think you need a combination of both. I see you shaking your head. Sounds like you agree with me. Neither argument hits the mark in its entirety.
When you compare these two conferences, the thing that's so tough is everybody only either wants to pay attention to what's at the top or what's at the bottom. It's like, well, you guys have more worse teams or we have more better teams. Where I think, are we giving, just before I kind of give anything away, are we giving who we believe is going to be the better conference in 26
yes,
right now?
We will at the end. Yeah, we will at the end.
Okay. Wait till the end. I am with you. You need a combination of both because one can't be the end all be all. It's very similar to like, well, what's better, head to head or overall resume? And it's like, well, you kind of you have to evaluate both. And in the conversation of the SEC versus the Big Ten, it's not just who's winning national titles and who's just the deeper, because depending on what lens you look at, will give you your answer. If you only care about national titles, then the Big Ten, by whoever's doing the measuring, is a better conference. If you talk about who's the deepest, whoever's doing the ranking, the SEC would have to be the better conference. So you need a perfect combination of both. I'm with you in that 100%.
I think if I'm going to weigh them, you need both. I'm putting a little bit more on how many championship contenders do you have than I am your depth. And so it's like, if you're going to make the claim we have better depth, that gap better be wider than the gap is between how many title contenders or who your top teams are. That's the other part that I would say, like getting into the weeds a little bit, Trevor, is yes, you have to be the best conference. I need you to be both. That's why we've never argued that the Big 12 is the best conference. We said it's most entertaining, but it's without a doubt the deepest conference in college football, still is, from how many teams can win that league. But why do we never argue that they're the best conference? Because they never have anyone at all that can win it all. 0 national title contenders in the Big 12. Incredibly entertaining regular seasons. But they're just, compared to the Big 10, the ACC has more title contenders, in my opinion, than the Big 12 has had the last couple of years.
Without a doubt.
And still is true. I think Miami is a significantly better program than what Texas Tech is. So when I look at it, Trev, it has to be both, but I'm not weighing them equal. To me, it's like 60-40, championships at 60, depth at 40. So that's why I think that when I look at the past couple years, the reason I give the Big Ten the edge is because I think their best teams have been significantly better than the SEC's best teams. I think that has been the gap there has been greater than the gap between the better depth of the SEC. And I don't even think that the depth was even better necessarily each year. I think it was probably better this past season, but I didn't think the SEC was deep at all in 2024. Like, at all. I thought that it was like 2 good teams and then a bunch of garbage, to be completely honest. Bama had no business being in the playoffs in 2024, no matter how much ESPN tried to tell us they should have been. Ole Miss didn't belong in the playoffs in 2024, no matter how much they tried to tell us at ESPN. So I didn't even think that they even had the depth advantage. I think the Big Ten had both in 2024. 25, I think you can make an argument. And I personally don't put a lot in bowl games when I'm having this conversation, because you don't always know what you're going to have as far as rosters and stuff like that. But I think the Big Ten had enough wins over SEC teams that did have pretty much most of their players the last 2 years for me to say that the depth was better. You can say, well, Bama didn't have a lot of guys playing against Michigan a couple of years ago. Oh, okay, that's fine. But South Carolina had all of their best players coming back, playing in that game in 2024 when they lost to Illinois. So, I'm not buying that argument. I'm pretty sure that Diego Pavia played in the game against Iowa, correct? I mean, all that Trey Richardson played. and they had some guys sitting out. Iowa had a couple guys sitting out, but they played their Heisman runner-up quarterback in that game, who said publicly on television, you only need to score 7 points to beat Iowa. Remember that?
Yeah.
Well, he scored 27 and still got beat by a tutty. So you kind of can miss me a little bit with the whole, well, our guys don't play. Well, that says a lot about the culture of your programs, that the Big Ten constantly has more players that play in bowl games than the SEC teams. That's not you're not making the argument you think you're making. That's
and if your
why
depth
you're
of
struggling.
talent, yes, and if your depth of talent is what you're claiming it to be, and we have SEC coaches going on record saying that they could win other conferences with just their backups, you having players sit out for bowl games shouldn't impact you as much as you think it does.
Right.
I'm with you completely.
And what does it say about the culture of your teams that you constantly have kids sitting out, but Big Ten teams don't? Well, what does that say about your league?
Mm-hmm.
It means you may be more talented, but you're not better. Well, Oklahoma had more guys sitting out than against Navy. Well, I'm sorry. You guys always talk about how terrible the option teams are. One of the head coaches of your league just said that his backups could go undefeated in the Big 12. But your backups can't even beat Navy? So you kind of miss me a little bit with that argument. It's not an argument in your favor. So here's something that's going to be fascinating before we answer the question, who we think is going to be better in 2026. The quarterback debate is going to have a big say in this. I'm in my head like, no, I think SEC quarterback play is better. And I start listing all the quarterbacks in the league of why I think that. Just in my gut reaction, you got Trinidad Campbell, Gunnar Stockton, Marcel Reed, Keelan Russell, or Austin Mack at Alabama. I'm just like going in order of standing. Arch Manning, John Mateer, Jared Curtis is a true freshman at Vanderbilt, was a 5-star recruit. You've got Austin Simmons at Missouri, Sam Levitt at LSU. You've got Kenny Minchie at Kentucky, potentially Aaron Philo at Florida, Byron Brown. I kept saying Bryce Brown yesterday for some reason. Byron Brown at Auburn, Camario Taylor at South Carolina, Lenoris Sellers at South Carolina. That's deep. And I'm like, oh, they're better. And then I'm like, well, hold on a second. Man, Big Ten, you got Josh Hoover coming. You've got Julian Sane. You've got Dante Moore. You got Jade Maeva, who Greg McElroy thinks is better than CJ Carr. You've got Bryce Underwood. You've got Damon Williams. You've got Drake Lindsay, who I think is a legit NFL prospect if he can kind of grow his game and stop from being arrested for drinking. You've got Aiden Childs, who's got loads of talent. Nico Iamale. You got Rocco Beck coming into Penn State. You've got Colton Joseph coming into Wisconsin, and Ryan Brown we've talked about, and then a guy that might be the most talented quarterback in the Big Ten is at Maryland. Right now, I still give the edge to the SEC. There's a lot more what ifs in the Big Ten, but I think how well that shakes out is going to ultimately determine who the better league is. Which league has some of those middle to bottom of that group of quarterbacks we just listed? Who has the bigger jump? Is it Camario Taylor at Mississippi State or Malik Washington? Who has the better year, Sam Levitt at LSU or Damon Williams at Washington? I think that how the quarterback play is this year ultimately is. Oh, and I forgot. Yes, thank you, Swanton Baum. I forgot about the kid from Cal, but no, the kid from Cal's in the ACC. So you're messing me up, Swanton Baum. But the point is, without a doubt, great depth in both leagues at quarterback this year. Which ones play better? Who has which guy lives up to the Heisman hype? Is it Arch or Dante or both? Which super talented young quarterbacks step up? Is it Bryce and Malik Washington in the Big Ten, or is it Camario Taylor and Keelan Russell in the SEC? That's going to, I think, have a lot of say in which league ends up being better after the fact. Now, going in, we'll project things, but that to me is going to have a big say on it. I was initially thinking like the SEC had the big jump, but as you go down the Big Ten roster of quarterbacks, this is one of the deepest years I've ever seen in the Big Ten when it comes to quarterback play. It helps that you got 18 teams, but you know what I'm saying. The percentage of the teams is what I'm referring to.
Agreed. For me, quarterback is absolutely in that discussion. That's going to sway it. And the other big factor for me is the coaches. You have coaches in both leagues that are going into very pivotal seasons, one way or another. It's like, okay, Lane Kiffin, you blew up your spot at Ole Miss to go to LSU, and you're calling them racist as you're walking out the door, all this other stuff, right? So,
clown. Oh,
will that move pay off for you? Can you bring LSU back and kind of rebuild what that reputation is after Brian Kelly shockingly tarnished it? And then you have other coaches in the Big Ten. It's like, okay, who can make that next jump? Is Pat Fitzgerald going to Michigan State? Can you get them to rise to the occasion? Bob Chesney going out to UCLA. Dan Lanning, can you finally not have the woeful exit from the college football playoffs where you lose by 30 points? It's, hey, Ryan Day, can you get back to making a run in the playoffs? That's not as big of a one considering, he made it last year and they won it 2 years ago. Not a shot at Ryan Day, Archer, in case you're listening, just staking the claim for what coaching impacts are going to have in each league. Hey, Matt Campbell, can you get Penn State back to being a better team record-wise than what they were last year with a significantly easier schedule than what you had in 2025? Hey, Will Steiner, you're going to pan out at Kentucky the way a lot of Wildcats fans are hoping that you're going to. Alex Golesh, can you bring and please help me out here because I'm hitching my wagon to you upsetting Alabama in the Iron Bowl. Can you bring back War Eagle to what they were, in the mid-20 teens versus to what they have been lately? So coaching and quarterback play, I think, is going to go a long way in deciding this factor with you completely.
So let's make our prognostications, Trevor. I'll allow you to start. Which league do you think will be better in 2026? Not who's better now, because I think that argument is kind of the Big Ten, because there's more knowns. We're projecting what John Sumrall will do, and
sure,
the known is okay. The Big Ten's the known. Let's project how we think the season is going to go, and say what league do we think is going to end up being able to rightly claim that they are the best conference of college football by the time we get to the end of the 2026 season. And I'll give my little asterisk as to why I think one talking point won't mean as much.
Fair enough. I'm going with the SEC, actually, by the end of the season, that I think is going to be considered the most dominant conference, using the things that we talked about that we're going to evaluate. Championship contenders, true championship contenders. Right now, I would say that the Big Ten has 3, the SEC has 2. So you have a one-team difference there. The biggest separator to me, in my opinion, is who comes after that and who's next in line. And that is very clearly the SEC. Between LSU, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Alabama. Crazy that we're even having a conversation that Alabama is now next in line in the SEC to be a national title contender.
Wild. And they're not even at the top of my list of those teams you just mentioned.
Nope. Agreed. It was crazy. Sorry. Quick sidebar. I was watching old Alabama highlights from 2016 and just seeing that defense, seeing some of the players that came through. Opposing teams used to fear Alabama. I welcome the opportunity to play Alabama now. Besides the point.
Oh, especially if you're a lineman. I mean, that was going to be a long day if you played on either line back in 2016, boy. You mean back when they did this thing called running the football? Remember that, Trev?
Yeah.
Bama would actually hand it off the running backs. Yeah, I remember them days.
Yeah, back in the day when on the same defensive line they had Ryan Anderson and Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen. And yeah, I remember those days. But where I think the SEC will have the advantage, and I'm not measuring this based on how many teams they get into the playoffs, because they had that in 2025, and I still thought the Big Ten was a better conference. They have more legitimate championship contenders or teams able to make that jump this year as compared to what the Big Ten has. That's why I think a lot of talking heads like Joel Klatt and people who support the Big Ten are really riding this USC train that this is going to be their year because they want to have that step up in contention with the SEC. So I have the SEC being that this year. I think that there's going to be a lot of quarterbacks that pan out in the SEC this year as well. So I'm going with the SEC at the end of the season.
I agree with you for all the reasons you said. I won't repeat them all. I just think that you have more, they got 5 teams in last year. I would argue none of them were championship contenders. Maybe Georgia. Maybe.
Sure.
None of those teams are going to win a championship. Oklahoma wasn't going on a run. They didn't belong in there. Alabama didn't belong in there. Ole Miss was a team that had a ceiling, and we saw that ceiling. When you finally play a well-coached team, you're going to get beat. That's exactly what happened to them. They finally played a well-coached team in Miami, and they got beat because they actually, I thought, had better talent than Miami across the board, athletically especially, but they just kept hurting themselves because they're not coached real well. And Miami honestly hurt themselves a little bit. And that's the one time we saw Miami with some of the penalty mistakes, but Ole Miss just couldn't take advantage because they're not a disciplined football team. And that's debatable if they had more talent. I think athletically they were the one team that Miami played athletically that Miami had some problems with in the playoffs. A&M didn't give them athletic problems. Ohio State had one athletic guy gave them some problems, but Miami could run with Ohio State for the most part and on the perimeter. Ole Miss gave them some problems. It's the depth of the league. And then I can't remember who said it in the chat, but the bottom of the Big Ten is still awful. I mean, it's awful. There's 8-9 guaranteed wins for anyone in the top 5 of that league. 8-9 might be a little bit much. There's at least 5 or 6 like just guaranteed wins in the Big Ten. Where, Kentucky sucked in 2024. They still almost beat Ole Miss. Kentucky's been bad in certain years and still almost beat Georgia. I mean, Purdue just can't even score against the best teams. Didn't they in 26 or in 24? Didn't they get blanked in 2 games? It was 100-something to nothing in 2 games against Ohio State and Indiana. Didn't even score.
Oh yeah, my favorite sports stat of all time is Purdue in 2024. If you gave them a 36-point head start in every single game of the regular season, they would have ended 6-6 and still lost 4 of those games by double digits.
Yeah. So I just think the depth of the league is better. I do. And that's what and I think this year that the SEC actually has at least 1, maybe 2 legitimate title contenders, where I don't think they did the last 2 years. Texas was their best hope 2 years ago. And we said they play anybody that can do anything in the trenches, they're going to get beat. Georgia plays anybody with an offensive pulse in 24, they were going to get beat. I mean, you knew those teams had major flaws that were going to expose them. Last year's the same deal. This year, I do think that Texas and Georgia will be better than they've been the last 2 years and will be teams capable of winning championships. Not saying they're going to win it. Here's the final caveat to me. Championships won't matter in 2026. It's going to be about your depth. The reason it's going to be about your depth is because the team that wins a title this year will not be from the Big Ten or the SEC. I flat out believe that because the team that's going to win a championship this year plays in that stadium right there. When Notre Dame wins the title this year, then neither team will have the "but we won the title" argument. Now it's going to get into who was stronger top to bottom. And I think this is when the Big Ten finally gets exposed for 2 things. Number 1, your schedules in the regular season are garbage, and you're very top heavy. That's what I think we're going to see this year. And Notre Dame's going to have a big role in that. And I think Miami could potentially have a big role in that too. I think there's 2 teams this year outside the Big Ten and SEC that could do a lot of damage in the postseason to where half the playoff won't be from either league. I think that's possible this year. I think half of it will be from both leagues or one of the leagues because I don't see a Big 12 team being a semifinal team. If Texas Tech gets the right draw, maybe. But I don't see them being that kind of team. I don't think anybody else in the ACC after Miami is a semifinal caliber team, in my opinion. But, maybe SMU gets hot and, maybe. But I don't think so. It's like saying – I think when you look at the top of the league, I think the semifinal has a chance to be Notre Dame, Miami, and then either 2 teams from the SEC, 2 teams from the Big Ten, or 1 of each. And I think that is going to somewhat negate the, oh, well, we had this or we had that. We won the title, we whatever. If neither of them win it, and I'm saying this partly because I do believe Notre Dame's the best team, but also partly to make a point that when you strip out winning the championship and then look at who's better, if neither league wins the title, Notre Dame wins it all. I think it becomes much clearer which league is going to be better this year. Not the last 2, this year. Because if Notre Dame would have beat Ohio State 2 years ago, it doesn't change the fact that the Big Ten was significantly better than the SEC was in 2024. Notre Dame beating Ohio State doesn't change that at all. Because you could argue that the next 2 best teams in college football that year were from the Big Ten. Let's say Notre Dame beats Ohio State. You could argue the next 2 best teams in college football and 3 of the next 4 best teams in college football were all from the Big Ten: Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State. last year, if Indiana loses to Miami, I think we're still probably agreeing that the Big Ten is better than the SEC. Correct? That's what we talked about before. Not by as much as 24. It'd have been a lot more of a debate last year. But when you look at 2026, Trev, Notre Dame wins it all. Now it's about depth and how many good teams there were and how good the middle and how good the bottom was. I think this year the SEC will actually be significantly better for the reasons that you and I have been talking about for the last 6 months. The coaching got better this offseason, head coaching and coordinator-wise. The talent in the league, to me, is – I think some of these SEC schools are finally learning how to compete in this new era. You can't keep doing it the way you used to do it. I think there's a couple teams that are going to be better than they've been in recent years. I think Georgia's going to have their best team since 23. I think Texas is going to have their best team since 23. I think Bama's got a chance to be better. We'll see. The coaching is still a big red flag for me. I think LSU is going to be better. I think this is going to be Oklahoma's best team since probably 18. The 18. I didn't think the 19 Jalen Hurts team was that good. I think this could be their best team since 18. I think that the SEC to me is going to be the deeper league this year. And if you take out the championship conversation, Notre Dame wins it all. Who's better? I think SEC gets the nod. I think coaching is improved, and I think quarterback play is improved. And because quarterback play in the SEC for the most part has been garbage the last 5 or 6 years. There's been Bryce Young was an elite quarterback. There's been some individual players that were great, but the depth of quarterback play in the SEC has been terrible in recent years. Now I think it's getting much, much better. And you actually have coaches in the league now that know how to get something out of those quarterbacks. Billy Napier had no idea how to get anything out of DJ Lagway. I think John Sumrall is going to have a better sense of how to get something out of his quarterbacks. That Alex Golesh is going to be able to get more out of his quarterbacks than what we saw from Hugh Freeze, and that's why I think the SEC in 2026 is going to be the better conference. And once Notre Dame wins it all, then Big Ten no longer has that. But we win the championships conversation.
Brian, to take us home here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We have a daily mailbag to get us there. Questions should be geared towards the topics that we discussed today. So SEC versus Big Ten. We previewed Purdue today. We talked about the top 5 defenses on Notre Dame's schedule. This does happen to be your first mailbag. You can put MB for mailbag or a mailbox emoji prior to submission. Lets us know to set that question aside. Super chats get bumped up to the top, but looking forward to answering some questions today.
Mm-hmm. We did have a super chat that I wanted to get to, Trev. We got one from 74 Ohio, so we'll kick things off with him.
Buy or sell, so no hold option here. Buy or sell, Marcus Freeman will ever win a national title at Notre Dame if it doesn't happen this year.
Sell. I mean, the team that he has this year will have one of his best recruiting classes ever, and they will be true freshmen. Next year's team will have 2 of those best recruiting classes he's ever had, and they'll be freshmen and sophomores. In 2028, who knows, even if their 28 class is like the 25 class, he'll have his 2 best recruiting classes ever on that roster, and they'll be juniors and sophomores. Look what happened when the 23 and 24 class became juniors and sophomores. For about 2 months, Notre Dame was the best team in college football, in my opinion. And that class are now seniors and juniors, and this team is what a lot of people think is going to be the best team in college football. And it's not just us that think that. Bill Connelly at ESPN has them number 1. What was the magazine that predicted them to win? Phil Steele has them preseason number 1. There was another magazine that predicted them to win it all. Which one was that?
ESPN.
ESPN, Bill Connelly, predicted Notre Dame to win it all. So it's not just 2 Notre Dame fans talking about it. It's why? Because those 2 recruiting classes that he had that we told everybody were legit top 5 classes are now veterans. What's it going to be when the 26 and 27 classes are sophomores, juniors, and seniors? And, either sophomores and juniors or then juniors and seniors. What's that going to look like? So no, I sell that. I don't think this is now. The only way that's true is if he leaves after this year. But if Marcus Freeman's the head football coach for the next 5 years and he doesn't win it this year, I'll be disappointed because I kind of thought this was the window where it would definitely happen. But I'm not going to be like, oh my gosh, they're never going to win it now. Because as talented as this team is, if he can at all retain the 26 and 27 classes, I would say the 28 and 29 teams are going to be even more talented.
I'm selling
my
this
team.
as well, and I've also raised the question of like, what else do you need? But that also doesn't mean that Notre Dame's championship window is going to be closed. I will have quite if Notre Dame doesn't win it all this year for reasons outside of like there could just be a better team.
Right.
I'm sure Alabama in 2019 thought that they were going to be the best team in college football, and then LSU 2019 happened. I mean, so I'm not naive to the fact that there could be a better team. Having said that, I'm also selling that this is his only time to win a national championship. There will be a lot of discussion about it in the 27 offseason, but doesn't mean it's a never. So I'm selling this as well.
Yep.
For my Den Benami, how much will Max Bola be able to affect the game with his inside knowledge of the Notre Dame team? Defensively, obviously, but can he help their offense much, or is it pretty irrelevant?
I think it's irrelevant. The only way it's relevant is if the team just uses the same exact signals they had from the year before. I mean, you're just like, you might as well just go hand them the game plan and say, hey, here's what we're going to call win. See, like if I give you my game plan, okay, you know what plays I'm going to run. You don't know when I'm going to run them. You don't know. There's a lot of things. Hey, we're going to run all these plays. But when I can know what you're about to run as you're calling it because you haven't changed your signals, then and that's the kind of signal stealing I think is okay. If I can pick up what you're doing on the other sideline in game because you haven't changed it, then that's on you. That's always been going on. So, but Notre Dame's not that dumb. And I just think that's something that gets overplayed a little bit. Teams are different. This team will be different in how they implement plays. Chris Ash will have some adjustments in how he makes calls. The offense will be different in how they make calls. There's just a lot of things that are going to be different. And if Max Bulla is spending the whole game trying to figure out what Notre Dame's doing, then he's not focusing on his team, and that's going to be a problem. So I think that's pretty irrelevant. We have seen this. I mean, I don't think it's relevant, but it's also kind of hypocritical of me to say that because my favorite story of my coaching career is how I I knew the coaches I was going against because I played against my alma mater, and we just beat him in the playoffs because I knew exactly what his tendencies were and all that kind of stuff. But that's at the Division III level. It's a much different scale of preparation and play calls and subtleties and adjustments and all that kind of stuff. And we had better players than they did on defense, their defense as well. I think that was a cool story for me. I don't think it has that same type of impact at the Division I level.
I mean this with all due respect to the student athletes at Michigan State. You can know what somebody's doing. You also have to be able to stop it. It's not like the NFL where even if you're a team like the Raiders playing a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, you're still some of the best football players on the planet.
Right.
There's a much more disparaging gap at the college football level, even in P4. So Michigan State, in theory, could know what they're doing. Sure. So it's like, yeah, I guess you could know that Notre Dame is going to be in cover 2 man. I still don't know if that means that KK Smith beats Leonard Moore on a post.
Sure, right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I mean that with all due respect to anybody
or that they can
plays
block
for Michigan State.
Traore or exactly.
Right. Or that their running back is going to be, you might know that they're in Tampa too, but that doesn't mean that your running back's not going to get met in the hole by Drake Bone or Kingston Viliamahasa. So there's a level of that too. You can know what somebody's doing, but you also have to do something with it. When the talent gap is that disparaging, I don't know how big of a factor that is.
Yeah. Trev, this isn't related to Big Ten SEC or the stuff we talked about, but I did give them the okay to bring this up. There's been a couple people that want to ask our opinion of the Brendan Sorsby situation. I am so glad that the Big Ten, that the NFL did what college football was unable to do. And his attorney can sue all he wants, but this is one of the benefits of having, antitrust protections. I'm very curious to see what the NFLPA does, but even then, I don't think the NFLPA would have much of a case here. The NFL rightly said, you have shown no remorse for being they didn't say this, but like a degenerate gambler, and you've shown no remorse for what you've done. You've said, oh, I have an illness, but you've never been apologetic. The fact that you immediately sued to try to be able to play again was something the NFL had a major problem with. And they said, look, what protections do we have? We don't have enough time to truly investigate and evaluate whether or not, we think you're going to come in the league and you've put these things behind you. Go get yourself right and get ready for the 27 NFL draft. And I think this is a big test for Brendan Sorsby to say, hey, are you actually remorseful? Do you actually think you have a problem? Because you can't in one breath say, hey, I have a disease, a gambling disease, but then not say I have some family that are in the 12-step program, and I believe one of the top things is making amends. Hey, I'm sorry for what I did to you when I was doing this. There's no remorse here from Brendan Sorsby. Where's their remorse? Soon as he gets ruled ineligible, what does his agent do? He goes on to, I'm going to burn Cincinnati down. I'm going to take them down with me. Now, you should have said that from the beginning. So I was happy that the NFL said no. I genuinely hope that if Brendan Sorsby has a gambling addiction, or at least recognizes that he has I think he has a gambling addiction. I think we can all agree with that. You don't make that many bets if you just have a rational, normal view of it. I'm not talking about just bet. Like when you're betting, when you're doing something that to be wrong and illegal. I'm not talking about someone who's got the money to go to Vegas every day and play roulette. That's not advised, but you could maybe do that and not have a gambling problem. But when you're doing things and you're faking people's names and accounts so you can bet on a thing, do something is wrong and illegal, you've got a problem. He genuinely does have a problem. But the problem that I have is that him having a sickness that I believe is real, I've seen it ruin people that I care about. You got to admit that you actually have a problem and believe it, as opposed to just, I'm using this as an excuse to play again. That's the thing. Like, hey, I admit that I have an alcohol problem. Well, you're only doing that because you think it's going to get you out of severe sentences for the bad car crash you caused while drunk. You don't actually believe that it's a problem. You just know you have to do this to avoid the worst possible consequences. Brendan Sorsby's whole actions this entire time do not come across to me as someone who recognizes what they were doing is wrong. They're repentant for it and truly finding help. It was more of the FBI is closing in on me. Let me pull out I have a problem card. And then when things don't go my way, I'm suing. Yeah.
I have been for a long time a big proponent of the buck always has to stop somewhere. And I think that, and we not getting too much into any sort of political conversation, but we're starting to see some pillars fall between, like elementary school, then middle school, then high school, now college, and things are being a lot more leniently looked past. But I've always been a huge proponent that the train will always stop in the workplace. And in the football world, the NFL is that workplace. And the things that you were able to get away with in high school and college will just end eventually. And that's what Brendan Sorsby's going through. I agree with everything that you said. Nothing that you were doing, you had an illness, you had your coach talking some nonsense about, I don't even know if he'll play for Sam Houston State, buddy. Sit this one out. Yes, you do. He's not addicted to heroin. He was a gambling guy.
Right.
He will physically be able to play against Sam Houston State.
Right.
Stop trying to run cover. But the NFL saw through it. And if there's one thing that the NFL will be steadfast on, in my opinion, is when gambling becomes a thing. And that's they made the correct ruling. That's my thoughts on the Sorsby situation.
I thought they needed to be harsh in their response, and they were.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that they could have just said, hey, we've just decided, best of luck to you. I think they needed to be like, this is why. Because they needed to send a message to college football. Hey, I don't know what's going on there, and you guys can't even govern yourself. That's a problem. But you know what? Players, don't think that you're going to sue your way into – you can sue your way into playing in college football again. You ain't going to play for us. We are able to enforce our rules. And this is not going to happen. I was glad they did that.
Same. From Beezer 12, Washing Beard, we always hear the Big Ten is top heavy and the SEC is deeper. But if you take Bama out of the SEC, they only have 16 titles as a conference, whereas the Big Ten without OSU has 24. What do you think?
That's a great stat. I think it's irrelevant because this isn't like who's the best conference in the history of college football. Because, I mean, now you're like, okay, did Penn State's got 2 titles? Did either of them come when they were in the Big Ten? You know, like, I don't really care that Minnesota's got some national championships from the 50s in the 30s. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. You know, like, great, Minnesota won national titles before my dad was born. It doesn't mean anything to me. You know what I mean? Like, it's what about the last 10, 20 years? I mean, the last 20 years, if you take Alabama out of the college football, right? So you've got Big Ten has Ohio State in 02, Ohio State in 14, Michigan in 23, Ohio State in 24, Indiana in 25. So you have 5 titles between, what did I just say, 3 teams? If you take Bama out of the equation and you go back to 2000, you still have LSU has won titles, Florida has won titles, Auburn has won titles, LSU has won titles, Georgia has won titles. There's still more teams that have won championships in the last 25 years in the SEC and more championships won in the SEC than in the Big Ten if you take out Bama. And that's including leaving in Ohio State. So we want to take out the best teams in both leagues. Then, okay, the Big Ten has what, 2 in the last 26 years? And one of them has a giant asterisk by it because they cheated. You know, LSU has more than that by themselves in the last 26 years. I mean, the Big Ten as a league has 5 since 2000. Am I missing somebody, Trev? You've got of teams that are currently in the that were in the Big Ten when they won the title. Because then you can throw in Texas. You had to be in the league. You have Ohio State in 02, Ohio State in 15 or 14, Ohio State in 24, right? Yeah. And you have Michigan in 23, Indiana in 25. Am I missing any Big Ten teams outside of that?
No. Nope.
So yeah, US. I mean, there's some that are in USC won a title. They're in there now. I'm talking about that were in the league at the time. If you take out Alabama, the SEC still has more titles since 2000. So LSU has, if you take out Ohio State, LSU has more than the rest of the Big Ten combined in that stretch. And so I don't really care what happened 30 years ago. I also never like analogies to say, well, if you take out this team,
that's where I'm at. I don't like those arguments with anything. Like, I have a debate with a buddy about NFL quarterbacks all the time. And they're like, oh, I think Dak Prescott sucks because if you didn't give him Des Bryant and Zeke Elliott or, he didn't have CeeDee Lamb, then what is he? It's like, well, what are we talking about here? Like, I love my car, but if you take the wheels off, then it can't drive really well. Like what are we talking about here? Like, you need it all. So I view the same here because I don't want to take out Alabama because they are in the SEC. I don't want to take out Ohio State because they are in the Big Ten. I get the point that you're trying to make. Just my own personal thing is I don't like it when we take outside of the top achievers, you remove that, and then what are they? It's like, well, yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, agree. I just think that at some point in time, talking about what you did in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s doesn't mean a whole lot to me.
Yeah.
And he says SEC lives off success of 2 teams. Not saying the Big Ten is better. I'm saying they're both mid. I think you're wrong here. I think that you're showing maybe some I love you, man. You're one of my favorite posters, but like, I just think you're showing a little bit of bias here. Because again, I just said, take a couple teams. Take out, who we're going to say, LSU and let's take out LSU and Bama. All right. So you still have how many teams that have won a title from you still have Florida's won 2 titles. Auburn's won a title. Georgia's won 2 titles. So that's 3 teams that have won a championship since 2000. The Big Ten has 3. So even if you take out the 2 best teams from the SEC and whoever you want them to be, whether I say LSU because I think Georgia had 2 titles in 2 years. Outside of that, they never won a title. LSU won a title in 04. They won 07. They won in 19. They had different eras. You take away Bama's, 7, and you take away 6, and you take away LSU's 9. The Big Ten still has fewer teams that have won a title than the SEC, or the same number. And if you go back 2 years past the 2000s, and you add Tennessee to the mix in 1998, you've had more teams win a championship in the SEC than the Big Ten, even if you take out the top two. That's just a fact. So I think the whole, the rest of the league has been mid. I just don't agree with that. I mean, we watched, let me just look up something here real quick. I mean, we just watched, with all due respect, we just watched Ohio State lose a bowl game a couple years ago to Missouri. Like, you can kind of miss me a little bit with some of that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I don't get, I understand everybody wants to say, this league is good, that league is, good because of these top two teams. But look, has the SEC been overrated from what the SEC and ESPN think it is? Yes, but let's not pretend like, if not for the hype from the SEC or the ESPN, that the Big 12 Big 10's been way better the last 25 years. It hasn't been. There's been a year here, a year there, but it just hasn't been.
Yeah, the hype is there for a reason. ESPN also has a partnership with the ACC. You don't see them hyping up the ACC. And that was even with the run that Clemson went on in the mid-20 teens. Like, the hype is deserved. It's been overplayed now, and now it's been taken to another level that's a little bit too exaggerated. But I don't think it's just there's only two teams in that league that have success.
Yeah. I mean, look, the ACC of teams that are currently in it, you could talk about, like, they've won more titles, but even if you take that away, look, the Big Ten since 2000 has had 3 teams win national titles. The ACC has 2. Like, the ACC you're closer to the ACC than you are the Big Ten. I mean, than you are to the SEC. Because Miami's title in 01 was a Big East, so that doesn't count. But I mean, it's not a compelling argument. And if you want to go back to like 1990, the ACC is even better. They got Georgia Tech has won a title, but like, you got Clemson and Florida State have both won titles in the last 25 years. The Big Ten has 3. So you're closer to the ACC than you are the SEC. And we can be annoyed by the SEC is so great, but you can't just start spinning stuff to like, well, if you take away this one team, but because even when you take away that one team, the argument still doesn't favor the SEC or the Big Ten. I mean, that's where I'm going to miss me. Like, I would like to push back on some of the SEC dominant stuff we've talked about. I mean, I think that if you had a non-biased partner, which ESPN was biased, the BSCS was biased, the playoff committee is biased, there are some teams that would not have won championships. I've made this case. I think in 2011, the SEC did not have the best team in college football. I think the best team in college football that year was either Oklahoma State or Stanford. I will take that to my grave. But because of the flawed system, that they got a chance to have a rematch, and I think it should have been LSU against either Stanford or Oklahoma State, and I think both of those teams would have beat LSU in 2011. It is what it is. How many of those other teams would you view as fit? I mean, 12 Bama, they were legit. You guys all had a chance to keep them out. Baylor and Kansas State choked it away. Or it was Oregon and Kansas State choked it away. You had your chances to keep Alabama out. I think that the SEC gets too much hype, but I still think that the SEC has been better than the Big Ten for the most part the last 25 years. And I don't really care what happened in the 20s or the 30s or the 40s or the 50s, unless we're talking about 2020s.
Agreed completely. From iCave, now that the tight end room is healthy again, do you think we'll see some more 13 personnel? I think tight end run blocking is underrated and was a big reason we struggled in short yardage last year.
I think that's fair. I think it's a lot more than that. I think there was a lot of issues inside of the tackle tight ends that caused short yardage situations last year, including some play calling head scratchers. But I do think it helps to have good tight ends. I don't think it's a coincidence that Notre Dame was pretty good in short yardage against Pitt in a game where James Flanagan had his most action of the season. I don't think that's a coincidence.
No.
I mean, just think of that fourth down run that Jeremiah bounces outside. Like that helped because you had the edge set pretty well. He just had to make one guy miss.
Mm-hmm.
I think that helps.
Agreed. The struggle that Mike Denbrock is going to have is like, okay, you go 13 personnel. Which wide receiver do you take off the field? All I want to see and make sure of is that we don't see, with all due respect to Matt Jeffrey and Jordan Faison, I don't want them to be the slot receivers bunched around the line of scrimmage on the goal line to be blocking players. That is where I want to see more tight ends. But yeah, I think there's definitely a chance between the Flanagans, a Rolfrey and Premer, Ty Washington. Absolutely. From Time Cone, which team, Miami or Notre Dame, will have the higher scoring offense during the regular season?
I think it's going to be close because I don't think either of them are playing very good defenses for the most part this year. I think for all the talk about Notre Dame's schedule, I'm sorry, Miami's schedule is even softer than Notre Dame's. It is. And Miami fans in the chat are going to be upset about that. But you guys all think Miami's better than Notre Dame. So Notre Dame has the tougher, best game, right? That's what you guys all think, correct? Your next best opponent is what? Wake? Duke? What's the next best team? Clemson? What's the next best team that they play this year? Whereas Notre Dame's got to play a team that beat Miami last year, and then they got to play BYU. With all due respect, anyone that wants to try to tell me that right now they can say for sure that Clemson or Florida State or Duke or Wake Forest are going to be better than BYU, then I'm sorry, you're not having an honest conversation. Could they be? Anything could happen. But come on now.
Right. If we start making evaluations based on anything can happen, then let's start talking about Purdue making the college football playoffs. I'm with you, man. But it'll be close. I think we'll have to we'll have to differentiate between higher scoring offense versus higher scoring team. Because I think Notre Dame is going to pick up a good amount of defensive scores this year, especially with some of the offenses that they'll face in the regular season. So I think we'll have to kind of clarify that, but it'll be close.
Trev, we're seeing some bias from our fans, and we gotta be careful with what you're saying. So first of all, Mike says since the CFP expanded to 12 teams, the SEC has only beat teams in their own conference and G6 schools. That's why opinions are changing nationally. Shaking my head again. They got 5 of 12 teams last year. Mike, there's just a couple times in the chat that you've pushed back on something that either A, we're not saying or ignored what we said. We literally both said that the last 2 years, the Big Ten has been better than the SEC and the SEC has been overrated. Have we not said that on this show 1,000 times? But what Beezer said was saying, go back over the last 20 years, and if you take out Alabama, the Big Ten's been better. That's just provably false. And the last 2 years doesn't change that. If you want to have an argument about who's been better the last 2 years and ESPN's given them too much hype, and we've said that. We're all agreeing on that. That's not a debate. In our opinion, the Big Ten has been better. We've said that. But we don't get to rewrite history. We don't get to also say, well, if the SEC would play better non-conference games. Really? Have you seen the non-conference games of the Big Ten teams that have won national titles the last 3 years? Are you kidding me? They have the last 3 Big Ten champions, the last 3 teams to win a championship from the Big Ten have played a grand total, I believe, of 0 Power 4 teams out of conference. Come on now. Let's be honest and fair here. I'm all for hammering the SEC, but we're gonna hammer the SEC on real facts, not spin. And the Big Ten also has given their top teams way softer schedules than the top teams in the SEC have got the last couple of years.
100%.
And the SEC is playing tougher games. LSU played USC and Clemson the last couple of years. Who did Ohio State play out of conference? 1 game against Texas. Who did Michigan play out of conference? 1 game against Oklahoma. Who'd Penn State play out of conference? Who's Oregon played out of conference the last few years? Georgia plays Georgia Tech every year. Florida State plays Florida every year. There's South Carolina plays Clemson every year. So, no, I'm all for hammering the SEC, but when we start saying things that just aren't true, now we're having the same spin and bias that we accuse SEC people of having pro SEC. You don't fight spin with spin. You fight spin with facts.
That was a bar. I like that. Put that on a t-shirt. From Jay Melvin. Brian, do you think the SEC will start catching up to the Big Ten in the coming years due to the big SEC schools now having coaches we like at LSU, Florida, Auburn, and Texas A&M?
Yeah, and we chatted about this. He put this question up before, but I think he makes a good point, and he observed that even before we set in the show. That's why I'm giving him a shout out here. I think it's been very clear to anyone that's being honest And I get that the ESPN people won't say this because they can't be honest because they have a contract with that league, which is a big part of the problem that we have right now with ESPN. They can't give honest evaluation of teams because it hurts their bottom line to call out their breadwinner. I understand that. But coaching in the SEC by and large has been very mid the last 5-6 years.
Oh, yeah.
Very mid. And that's why Kirby Smart has dominated that league with rosters that don't match what he had 5-6 years ago. And that's when he did have those rosters, they annihilated the rest of the league. It's why Nick Saban dominated that league so much. Because once Urban and Spurrier left, the SEC's been just kind of getting by with good talent for a long time. We've seen very mediocre coaches win championships because they had way better players than everybody else. LSU won 2 national titles with 2 very average coaches. Auburn won a title and played for the title with 2 pretty just okay coaches. One was not very good. One was solid. Gus Malzahn was a solid head coach. Gene Chizik was not. Good defensive mind, but average head coach. I mean, Trev, like, they've won because they had way better players than everybody else. That's not the case anymore. And now the coaching is getting exposed. That's why you'd see these Barry Alvarez teams either beat or go toe-to-toe with these really good SEC teams back in the 90s and 2000s. And he'd have like 3 NFL players. They'd have 10, and they'd go take them to the wire against Tennessee and Auburn. Because they've always had better coaching in the Big Ten. And that's what the SEC is finally waking up to. Like, dude, we got to up our coaching. And you get a Mike Elko into the league. You keep Lane Kiffin in the league. You go out and get Alex Golesh. You go out and get John Summerall and hope that those guys can do a better job. There was a golden era in the late 2000s of the SEC where coaching in the SEC was really good.
I think
you had
09.
Meyer, Nick Saban, and Steve Spurrier. 09, you had Saban, Spurrier, and Urban Meyer all in the league. And like Tommy Tuberville was still I mean, there were some really good coaches in the league back then. And that's partly why you were so dominant at the time. The last 10 years, it's been you had one great coaching staff, another great coaching staff that is now a really good but not a great coaching staff. And that's why those coaches continue to win the league year after year after year. Because you don't have great coaches throughout the league. That's starting to change a little bit. Well, that's starting to potentially change if those coaches can be successful at their new stops.
Agreed.
Still got a ways to go, though.
From the history expert, which defense before BYU will pose the toughest challenge for the Notre Dame offensive line pass blocking? Oh,
ooh, that's a good one. I think you could argue it's North Carolina.
That's who I'm going with.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they have Makard Abu-Jabe coming back. He was a very productive player last year. I think he's going to present before they get to Damon Wilson. He'll present more issues for the Notre Dame offensive tackles than even what BYU will. And then there's also, who is the name of the other player that you also had on your all-opponent team, their interior guy?
Isaiah Johnson.
Isaiah Johnson. Yeah, I mean, I would say North Carolina and then probably Wisconsin. I'd go those two in that order, probably.
Mm-hmm. Michigan State, maybe if some things I think it's the order you said. I think it's North Carolina, then Wisconsin. And then I'd put Michigan State third.
Yeah.
And then probably Purdue, then Stanford. No, Stanford, then Purdue, then Rice.
Then Purdue. Yeah.
Yeah. That'd be my order. Good question.
Yeah. From Jay Melvin, Brian, question for you. But how do you feel about getting into arguments with opposing fans? I remember weeks ago, a Texas Tech fan compared you to a CBS Democrat. Do you find it funny or does it irritate you?
It doesn't irritate me. I find it comical. It just goes to show people will say anything. To have someone accuse me of being a Democrat was literally one of the funniest things I've been accused of. I was like, okay, that's one way to go. Just shows you have no clue what you're talking about, but sure, go for it, buddy. You know what I mean? Like, whatevs. But you know why I don't get upset about that stuff? Because I found when people start throwing names at you, when people start talking about, that I'm overweight, or people talk about I played at this level or coached at this level, when people start hurling personal insults at you and they can't attack your argument, that means you've won. It's like Bill Burr said when he learned how to finally win an argument. He said, when women are right, they will stay on point and hammer it home. But when you're right, they'll start throwing all these insults at you. Because when they start doing that, you want to just bob and weave, just, wait them out. Like you've won the argument. And that's what I found when people on social media, and especially in social media, but it's true in real life, when they start throwing insults at you and they're not willing to engage your point, it means you've won. And they're trying to get you into a name calling match. And when you do that, you will basically lose the plot. And so try to keep on. There's a guy I was debating with the other day, Trev, and I kept saying, so are you going to answer the question? 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 I had some insults for him, but I kept saying, okay, you're being dumb. Bring it back here. Are we going to address it? And he wouldn't address it because he knew he had nothing. So I stay off social media for the most part, but then I'll have those days where I'm just like, dude, I'm feeling like mixing it up a little bit today and have some fun with it. But yeah, listen to the Texas Tech fans. Like when you start insulting me about stuff like this, it's like, yeah, you've really lost the plot. Like, do you think only people in Texas are Republicans? Apparently, like I'm not a Republican either, Trev. You know my stance on my party affiliation, but I thought that was hilarious. Very hilarious. It doesn't bother me. The opinions of people who I don't know or who don't know me, if they get me down, that has nothing to do with them. That is 100% on me. And I find it comical. Doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I'm with you. Sidebar.
I don't much care for the opinion of people I do who I do know. You know what I mean? Like, go ahead, Trev.
You want to talk about insane recall? You guys think that me and Brian have great recall? Nobody has recall like my wife trying to win an argument. Dude, her recall is nuts. I mean, we'll be going back and forth at it. She'll be like, oh, yeah? July 3rd, 2017, 4:15 p.m. What up? And it's just like, dude, hey, man.
Like she could be making it up and you have no idea. Like you have
no I believe her. She says it with enough conviction.
Yeah,
I'm just like, yeah. Apparently I did something on July 3rd of 2017 at 4:05 p.m. No, man, I'm with you about this. Like Brian definitely gets it more than I do, but look, man, you got to have more than 6 followers for me to even pay attention to you. Like, I hate to sound like that guy, but I just don't let any social media stuff bother me. It's all like, there's a lot of keyboard warriors out there, man. Mm-hmm. Like, a lot of keyboard warriors. From Alekino, don't know if it's mailbag day, but what are the chances Notre Dame has all 5 stars on their starting offensive line in the next 2 years?
I mean, it's possible. It's unlikely, but possible. I don't know that all the 5 stars can fit all 5 positions. Like, I don't know that you're going to be able to get one of the 5 stars at center. Maybe, but I would say unlikely. I don't think it's also, I wouldn't assume that just because a guy's a 5-star, he's going to be better than another guy. And there's also the reality that the starting times of the 5 guys may not intertwine. So Will Black, Gerby Lambert, Grayson McHugh, and Olu Olubabola, Albert Simeon, if he picked Notre Dame just hypothetically, could all be starters at Notre Dame. But it doesn't mean that it's going to be at the same time, because Gerby Lambert may be gone by the time that, Grayson McHugh steps into the lineup. Gerby Lambert leaving might be the reason why Grayson McHugh stepping in the starting lineup. And then Will Black leaving may be the reason why so-and-so. So, a 4-star junior is usually going to be a lot better than a 5-star freshman. That, I'm using that loosely to make a point. So that's why I don't, but it's possible because they're recruiting so many 5-stars right now that it certainly increases the odds. In the past, like, no, they don't have 5 stars, so it can't be that way. But now it's like, yeah, they're going to have 5. So we'll see. I just don't know if it fits to have all of them on the field at the same time.
Definitely a fun spot to be in, though. That's for sure. From Jay Melvin, Brian, do you think John Summerall will turn Florida into a championship caliber team again with the way he's recruiting and the staff he's putting together?
Way too early. I mean, let me see him coach a game before. He's recruiting better. Is he recruiting a championship level right now? No. I need to see him be able to build on the early success. I need to see that he can coach games. Like, there's been a lot of coaches that get hired and that first recruiting class and everybody's excited. They go out there and put some dogs on the field, you know what I mean? And then they never repeat that again. Brian Kelly's first full recruiting class brought them Aaron Lynch and Stephon Tuitt and Ishaq Williams. And guess what happened is he never repeated that again. So I just need to see long term. I mean, he didn't even win convincingly win the AAC last year. And as we've talked about, Trev, I said convincingly win. Obviously, they had a good year, but I mean, I would say Willie Fritz has had better teams not make the playoffs than what we saw last year.
Yeah.
But he also walked into a good situation. This is what I pointed out the other day. We've seen Alex Golesh turn a team around. We've seen Bob Chesney turn a team around. We haven't seen John Summerall turn a team around. We saw John Summerall walk into a great situation and keep it rolling, but that's not what he's doing at Florida. So it's an unknown. I like what he's doing so far, Jay Melvin. I'm not trying to diminish what he's done so far. It's just he's got a lot he's got to show me before I'm ready to say that. I will say this. Florida is a program that can be championship caliber with the right coach. That's been proven. Is he the right coach? That's TBD. Good start, though. Good start.
Agreed. From Killer 67, the only weakness Notre Dame has is Chris Ash. What are your thoughts on him still being Notre Dame's defensive coordinator?
I would not call Chris Ash a weakness. I would say that Chris Ash, to a degree, is still a question mark. I would not call him a weakness. I don't think Notre Dame has a weakness. I think Notre Dame has areas where I don't think Texas has a weakness. I don't think Oregon has a weakness. I don't think Ohio State has a weakness. I think those teams have areas that aren't as good as others that could end up being reasons that other really good teams beat them. But I don't know that I'd call those weaknesses. And I think that Chris Ash has got to prove that he can be a championship caliber coach. Is he that yet? I don't know. He's got to prove that to me. But that's different than saying he's a weakness. A weakness is the 2021 offensive line. That's a weakness. That's not what this is. This is he championship worthy? That's what this question is. I've never said Joe Rudolph's a bad offensive line coach. I've asked if is he a championship caliber offensive line coach? There's a difference. Now, some people here, not championship caliber equals sucks. I'm not one of those people. I think there's a lot of areas in between. There's not you're great or you suck. That's social media talk. There's a lot of in between for anyone that has any kind of intellectual capacity whatsoever, which is why you all are here in the chat, because this is why you watch the show, because you don't like it just being, this or this for clicks. You guys like being challenged. You guys like having conversations that are where we address the gray. It's easy to talk about the black and white subjects, but can you really handle the gray? And that's kind of where we live. Like, let's embrace those topics. You know what I mean? Like, in that regard, I don't think he's a weakness, but I think he is still one of a few things that we have to see, is that championship worthy. I think he's one. I think the offensive line coach is still one that we need to see, is that championship caliber from a coaching standpoint. It's good though, but is it elite? I've never said Chris Ash sucks. I said Chris Ash did not do a good job last year for what the expectations were, which were to win a championship. But he wasn't. We'd get kind of annoyed when people would compare him to Brian Van Gorder. That's bad. That's a weakness. A defense coached by Brian Van Gorder is a weakness. This is different.
Agreed 100%. Another one from Killer. Will Notre Dame and Miami be the best game in the regular season? I mean,
it has a chance to be. Trev, don't you think?
Yeah. For Notre Dame, without a doubt. In the grand scheme of college football, it's in the contention, and a lot of the other games that will be in contention are all on the same weekend. I mean, you get Oregon at Ohio State in the shoe, you get Alabama LSU, I think you have Georgia Ole Miss, you have the Holy War in that all the same weekend. But it'll be one of. I think it'll be one of. I mean, you get Ohio State, Texas early on in the season, I believe in week 2. So there's a lot of games in contention. But if this was a buy, sell, hold, I would buy that it has the potential to be.
I mean, there's also a world, Trevor, where it's not even the best game of the weekend.
Right.
I mean, I think it will be. But if we're being honest, Trevor, there's a world in which Florida, Oklahoma might be better. LSU, Alabama might be better.
Yeah.
Georgia, Ole Miss might be better.
I mean, Think about last year in week one. It was the noon game was Ohio State, Texas. The afternoon game was Alabama, Florida State. The night game was LSU, Clemson. And the best game of those three was Alabama, Florida State.
Right.
Ohio State, Texas was a snooze fest.
Boring
that
game.
game was boring. I mean,
Yeah.
the LSU Clemson game was just kind of ugly, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, there's
And Oregon, Ohio State is also that day.
Yep.
So, and now if everyone maxes out and everybody's as good as they should be, I think the two best games that day are probably Oregon, Ohio State, and Notre Dame, Miami. Probably. But if everybody plays to their potential, that Alabama LSU game is going to be a heck of a game as well. You know, Georgia Ole Miss could be a heck of a game if you know, I mean, dude, you've got multiple games. I mean, a lot of those teams are playoff teams, you know? I mean, so yeah, it could be. It could be. It could be the best matchup, but end up not being the best game too. I mean, if one of the teams blows the other one out or wins convincingly, then it doesn't make it a great game. It's the best matchup of, you know, it could be number one versus number two. There's a world in which it's number one versus number two. I think if both of these teams are as good as they should be, at worst, it's two top four teams. At worst. I mean, there's a world in which the top four teams are playing each other that weekend, Trev.
And Ohio State, Oregon,
yeah,
Notre Dame, and Miami, yeah.
There's a world in which that's true.
Yeah, that weekend's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Another one from Killer. I feel like the Irish are falling off in terms of stadium capacity. I feel like Notre Dame's home game impact is slipping, and I feel there should be a big expansion.
Strongly disagree with that. I don't think the size of the crowd matters as much as some people think it does. If you can't get loud in an 80,000 seat stadium, then you're the problem. I've talked to people that went to games in the 80s, and there's some people in the chat that'll tell you that. I talked to Lou Samoji, and I've talked to Tim Priester and other people that have been going to Notre Dame games since the 70s and 80s. And Lou would say that he's been in much bigger stadiums, but the loudest stadium he was ever in was Notre Dame, Miami in 1988. 59,000 people in the stands. If there's 59,000 people watching a great game, screaming their heads off, that's going to be really loud. I would say if you think that, then you were not at the Indiana game in the playoff game. You were not there. If you think that, you were not at Notre Dame USC in 2017. You just weren't. Part of the problem with Notre Dame's home stadium is they've had a lot of crappy games in their home stadium in the last 10 years. A lot of bad opponents. And games where you've choked in what otherwise would have been big games. And let's be honest, arguably the biggest game to play inside Notre Dame Stadium in the last 10 years was played during COVID, sadly. I mean, what would that stadium have been like? Number 4 Notre Dame against number 1 Miami or number 1 US or Clemson? In a game Notre Dame wins 47-40 in overtime, there's 20,000 people in the stands. What's that like if there's 80? Because it was loud watching it on TV with 20,000 there when Notre Dame did big things. What would have been like if there was 80,000 people in that stadium? It's the opponents. Play better teams and the crowd will be plenty loud. Oh, and here's a thought. Maybe stop. Notre Dame sent out the dumbest tweet ever about a week ago. And this is part of the problem too, Killer. Notre Dame tweets out that their game against Stanford, I think it was Stanford game, is sold out. And then literally in the next sentence, check out our favorite ticket partner, whatever, SeatGeek or whatever, to get tickets to the game. I'm like, if there's tickets available to the game, then it's not sold out. The fact that you have now turned sold out in, we've sold 10,000 of our tickets or 20,000 of our tickets to a ticket partner who still has those unbought tickets, and you're not sold out. And how many of those tickets are going to other teams' fans? That's the problem. It's how Notre Dame allocates stadiums. The fact that now you have these ticket companies giving these tickets. Here's another problem. A lot of fans like us, I can't speak for you, Killer. I'm talking about me and Trev. We can't afford to go to home games all the time. If I wasn't getting in for free, I couldn't be at every home game. I couldn't afford to go to every home game. Or even if I could, I'd have a hard time justifying it. My wife and I looked into getting season tickets a few years ago so we could have for my parents to go to games. And not only were the tickets, they were reasonable. They were expensive, but reasonable. But then I had to pay like a 5-figure like down payment, like fee or whatever to get it. And I'm like, I can't afford that. But then they'll sell it to these ticket brokers, make a bunch of money off of it, jump the ticket prices way up. And then guess what? My buddy who has 5 kids who would go to the game and they would scream their freaking heads off, can't afford to go to the game, but the rich donor who's there on a business meeting or is too bougie to get up and scream, they can afford tickets. Or fans that only got to do it once and they're willing to pay $1,000 freaking dollars to go to that game will be there. Well, guess what? They're not going to be very loud when Notre Dame's doing something. So there's a lot of things that have hurt Notre Dame's game day impact in stadium. None of them have anything to do with how many people are in the stands. You could argue the DJ compared to the band is part of the conversation. There's a lot of things that you could factor in to why game day atmosphere at Notre Dame is not as loud and chaotic as it should be, or back when it was when there's only 59,000 people in the stadium. And none of them have to do with there aren't enough people in the stadium.
I had season tickets in 2023. I promise you the capacity was not the issue. I watched Notre Dame and Ohio State in person in 23, and I watched them in person in 2022. It was a higher ranked matchup in 2022. The stadium was bigger in 2022. It was louder in 2023. Can confirm. I was at both. I was at both stadiums.
You are correct.
Like that size doesn't matter. I promise you.
Yep. And then the last one right here.
From Jay Melvin, since we're talking Big Ten versus SEC, who wins between Texas and Ohio State? I think both will win their respective conferences.
I think that Texas will win that game because it's at Texas. If the game was at Ohio State, I'd say I think Ohio State would win. When it's two really, really good teams, especially in the offseason, I tend to go with the team that is at home. As we get closer to that game and we see how they play, was that in that game in week 2? We may watch one of their lines and the Ohio State offensive line looks terrible, or the Texas offensive line looks terrible, or one of their quarterbacks throws 3 picks, and we might change our opinion on that. But as of right now, with what we know about both teams, I'm going to go with the home team. So I'm going to go with Texas. If it was in Columbus again, I'd go with Ohio State. I think they're both very good teams. I think Texas has got more talent this year. It's still close.
Yeah, right now, FanDuel has it to where it's a pick'em game. It's Texas right now are 1.5 point favorites, and they're the home team. It's quite literally a pick'em game, and I don't know if the line is going to move any sort of it before game time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm with you completely.
Good stuff. All right, Trev. That's it, man. Why don't you take us out of here? Hey, I'll be on here in about 43 minutes. I'm going to be on tonight with Sean Stiers talking some recruiting. So we're going to talk about the kids that just committed, and we're going to kind of give the latest on where things stands with the players left on the board. So if you want to talk some recruiting, join me on the IB Nation Sports Beat here in about 40 minutes. If you're local and you're driving around, you can turn us on the radio. But, of course, we would also love it if you pull it up on our YouTube channel so you can listen to me and Sean talk about the latest with Irish recruiting.
Brian and I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the afternoon show. I believe talking some Notre Dame defense expectations for the season. Not going to want to miss that show. All the more reason to have that notification bell hit and be subscribed to this channel. On your way out of this show, be sure to hit that like. And then the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So you'll see Brian here a little bit less than an hour, and then you'll see both of us back here again tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.